Why doesn't psychology work now? So today we're going to look at leaving the death cult of modernity. I'll explain what that is in a minute. The religion of modernity is sending everyone nuts now, and here's how psychology is a part of that. Going to go through the mess we're in, how we got here, and maybe how to fix it. See all these memes about reject modernity, embrace tradition. Where are they coming from? Let's take a bit of a deep dive. Okay, short version of why psychology isn't working. Our current worldview is a death cult. I'm not exaggerating. I'm going to break down exactly why. It doesn't have what's called a sufficient anthropology. Explain what that is. And modern psychology buys into this. It's just not working. This is going to be hard to hear for some people. It may sound really backwards to some people. Actually, I'm going to take what I call a post-progressive view. Again, I'll explain what that is coming up. Personally, I got interested in this. My family are all nuts. So my family is absolutely riddled with mental health issues. We just got bad genetics. Like some families are tall, some are short, some are sane, some are not. So I really grew up with a lot of that and essentially kind of needed a psychology that worked. I was like, okay, what's just offered in the world isn't working. Went to university to study psychology, but I was pretty disappointed with mainstream kind of Western psychology at university. I noticed it wasn't really helping people on my course. I got a lot from martial arts, later like meditation, yoga, different things. That actually I was learning a lot more from than kind of Western psychology. And in my professional career, I've actually interviewed like most of the world's top like coaches, trauma therapists, many of the top psychologists, like all the famous trauma guys on my podcast, 700 people, biggest conference in the world on these kind of topics. And again, I've gone, something's really missing here in most cases. I think a few years ago, it was really brought to a head for me. I started a trauma charity, trauma education charity in Ukraine, like on the ground, and it was pretty intense. And I was supervising this pretty intense team of psychologists doing work with soldiers and civilians, people that had just been through hell. And I realized that the sort of general tricks and tools of Western secular modernist psychology, I'd call it, just weren't cutting it. Like they just weren't enough. And it kind of forced me to create things that were more effective, that were at least questioning of what we've inherited. I kind of sometimes joke that my own personal issues around psychology and sort of, struggles with addiction, I'm long-term sober, for example, mental health stuff, like the world's just caught up with me. Like I used to say I'm ADHD. Now I feel like everyone's ADHD. I don't think that's just the kids trying to be cool. Like we're all just mentally broken. And yeah, I've lived all over the world. Some places this is definitely worse than others. Like I'm in Croatia at the moment, temporarily, and that is, a little saner than the UK, for example. Yeah, you might say, yeah, but psychology does work, right? Like that's why we have it. Well, no, we're likely the most insane culture in human history. It's hard to measure, hard to get stats, obviously, on a lot of cultures, but it looks like we are literally the most mental culture ever. So whatever we're doing isn't working, right? Like this is we've had 100 years of psychotherapy, it's like 120, I think now, and we're just like a billion people with mental health issues, according to the World Health Organization. Self-ending, I have to call it that because of YouTube is the leading cause of death amongst young people, and even like kids. This is like a phenomenon that just didn't exist when I was younger, not anywhere near the same levels. So just record numbers of people on medications, addiction rates, just a coping mechanism. Look around, like the world is completely insane. And so something we're doing is clearly not helping. And the psychology we're using is to sort of counteract that is clearly not working. Sometimes I call this a psychological apocalypse. That there's kind of a tipping point with here. You can look up the stats and numbers yourself. It's hard to gather because there's issues around reporting and over diagnosis in some cases. But it's not just that. It's not just the kids all think they have mental illnesses when they don't. If you look at some of the harder measures like the self-ending, you'll see there is an absolute apocalypse going on psychologically. There's just a point we've got to where people can't cope with the world. What do I mean by that? Modernity, right? I'll explain the history of that. And I just say to people listening, like, how you doing? Like most people aren't doing great. And I know someone in the comments, but I'm fine, mate. Look around. Look around. I was in the UK a few weeks ago, and it's just clear people aren't well. It's like proper like crack addicts on the street, right down to just like a depressed person serving me in Greg's or miserable girl in Costa. Like everyone's anxious, everyone's depressed. Half of us are addicted to something serious, and everyone's addicted to something. It's how it seems to me. So just sort of subjectively, it seems that it's certainly in my life, this has really changed. Like this has changed. And from older people and people from more traditional cultures, I hear it's even, I was still coming in the midpoint, as it were. Yeah. So, in the words of the Backstreet Boys, tell me why have we all gone mad? Okay, so we're in a period of history which is also a worldview. I call it a cult for reasons I'm going to break down exactly why. I'm not exaggerating with that. It's just bad for us. Yeah, it's bad for us mentally and spiritually. We can't separate those two things out. In fact, it's just bad for us. And we're reaching a limit of what we can cope with this culture of modernity and late modernity. So modernity leads to psychospiritual hell. And again, strong words and words that we've been conditioned to be somewhat allergic to in modernity. Words like hell. Hell isn't like a fiery place somewhere else. Hell is a state. Someone that used to be an alcoholic and had various other addictions. Hell is a state of mind. It's a state of soul. It's a state of being that we're in now. So we're in hell. Very simply put, I'm going to break this down much more, but materialism, I'll say what that is, leads to nihilism, like not believing in anything, leads to hedonism because you've got to cope somehow, and this leads to addiction and death. So that is the world we're in. Put in a simple diagram. It's a bit of a black pill. There's some good news coming up later, I promise. Another way of looking at it is we're kind of slaves, right? People often feel enslaved by their phones or technology, or they're, see an alcoholic, they're enslaved by that, whatever it is. But there's a way in which we're in slavery, which even if our bellies are full, is deeply unsatisfying to our kind of actual human nature. So we're in this weird world, which is a little bit 1984 and a little bit Brave New World, right? So the state is having to increasingly surveil and watch us in order to keep an eye on everyone because there's increasing breakdown. Plus, you've got, the sort of we're all on the soma, we're all addicted to various things, a kind of Brave New World sense thing. So it's kind of a weird combination of these two, of Huxley and Orwell. This is the end of the human race as well. So this is like how serious it is. Right? I'm laughing because people don't think this is a serious issue. I had Rudyard Lynch on the podcast ages ago, and he talked about mouse utopia, which is this big experiment where when you put loads of mice together, eventually they just go crazy and stop breeding and they die. And that's what modernity has led to all across the Western world, and even more in countries like Korea and Japan, is at the end of the human race. The population is going down and down and down, and if it keeps on that trend, that is it, game over. So this is just a fairly serious issue we're looking at, even if you were just interested in survival level stuff and not spirituality. I'd also claim that the modern world is an aesthetic nightmare, whether it's modern music, modern films. I just heard Critical Drinker's like best films of the year, and it's so depressing. I love Critical Drinker, but it's like there's just so many bad films out. He was like struggling to find good ones. If I listen to like modern music or how people dress generally in the world today, almost put a jacket on, especially for you guys today for this. But I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. It's cold tonight. I'll keep my jumper on. Anyway, so that's Cruelly, by the way, on the left. If you're listening to anywhere else in the world, Cruelly, yeah, it's pretty much like hell. It's a sort of modernist town in the UK. There's a bunch of them that are like that, but they're utterly soulless, and people don't visit them like they visit Florence or whatever for a reason. Like Florence, I just out a few months ago, it's also going the way of modernity, sadly. So it's also a moral dead end, right? And I think we intuit. Like I heard someone trying to defend OnlyFans the other day, saying, "Oh, it's fine, and it's sex work is real work." Blah blah blah. I was like, "Really? Do you really think that?" And we look at the state of our politicians and just the sort of awful things that the music industry or politics or whatever is involved in, the constant lies we're fed in advertising, or right down to like our food production. And I just go, this is a moral dead end in the way we've been living, and I'm going to explain why. People often say, "Oh yeah, old people always think that." Like here's a quote from another period of decadence, because there are these periods of decline throughout history, and often older people think, "Oh, young kids today." But I think there's some real case to say that what we're looking at is it's a period of decadence, and there has been periods of decadence in the past. So these old quotes aren't wrong. They're from times of decline. But B, I think we can look at some unique factors of late modernity. Again, I'll explain what that is. Yeah, so we're essentially in the period of the morality of no morality. Yeah, so what you've got in modernity is a denial of the whole ethical domain. So why is something good or bad? People have quite strong opinions about what's good or bad. They can't really say why. So the whole moral frame, like if I said something's evil, most modern people would kind of cringe about that. They'd struggle with that because they find the whole moral framework difficult, and often the psychological is replacing the moral, but it doesn't really work for reasons I'll get into. You'll see things like language purity as a replacement for like a proper ethical and moral system. So like saying the right words, calling people the right thing. Is it person of color now? Is it disabled person? No, it's person of there's always this constant kind of purity game of language as a denial of the denial of the good, which has been removed from psychology, which is simply not about virtue or morality, but about just pure psychological well-being, as if it could be removed from that. I'm going to dig more into that in a bit. And this is really the heart of it, is when you say evil doesn't exist, it doesn't take evil away, right? It just hides evil and sends everyone nuts. Okay, so replacement virtue well-being. Frey India talked about this on a recent podcast I heard, but this is an old idea. And there are exceptions to this. There are therapy schools that look at morality, for example. There's something called MRT, for example. But generally, on the whole, psychology has replaced ethics, which was traditionally the system of building well-being, and much more. Yeah, you might say, yeah, but maybe we're just a bad time and psychology is doing its best, right? Like, what are you doing? Like, yes, we're all going crazy, but psychology's helping. I'd say no, that's not true at all. It's part of the religion causing the problem. So we could say that modernity has an insufficient anthropology. What does that mean? It means it has an inadequate view of human nature. Okay, so anything that comes from that inadequate view is going to be part of the problem. And there's ways in which psychology in its current form, which I have studied at university, I have talked to a lot of people, I'm not ignorant about this topic. And again, we're always talking generalities here, keeps people in the current hell. So attempting to get out of it is not helping. Attempting to sort of solve the problem from the same level is just not working. And there's exceptions to this. There's psychologists who would agree with a lot of what I'm saying. I'll mention a few later on. And yes, psychology is like a huge area, a big church, which is in this case almost not metaphorical. And you can about this, but like let me go through the argument. You'll see. Yeah, people might say, "Well, it's a bit over the top." Hell, is it? Is it a bit over the top? Let's find out. Let's go into like what is the cult of modernity? Does it actually qualify as a cult? I'm going to make a case for why. I'm going to break down exactly why it does, actually. So this is like the history we're told, right? The history we're told is that there were sort of cavemen for a long, long time, and then there was the classical period. Obviously, it's a bit Eurocentric, but it's classical period there. It's the Greeks and Romans or whatever. And then there was the Dark Ages. They were dark and horrible, and we're all eating turnips. We're all horribly oppressed by the king of the church. There's the Monty Python version of both there. And then the Enlightenment came along, and then that was great, and the technology got better and better, and we got iPhones and cappuccinos, and Steven Pinker in the corner there was happy. We got feminism and human rights, and everything was just getting better and better, right? And this is the history. Well, the thing about history is that it's written by the victors. Even the framings, right? The Enlightenment, that's a great branding. The Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, right? The classical period. There's a certain framing that's given that's explicit. It's in the naming, but also in terms of how we're taught to think about these times, right? So most people think of the Middle Ages as this terribly backwards, awful time. Even the phrase backwards, right? We're going forwards. This is a Christian idea that's been adopted by liberalism, modernity. By the way, if I say liberalism, modernity, material modernity, same stuff, starting sort of 16th, 17th century, most people would say. Another way of looking at this, though, would be through a spiritual lens, right? So animist is like the most of your human history, most of prehistory. So 99.9% of your ancestors, 99.95, I think, where everything was alive. The hills are alive with the sound of the gods. So it's like everything's God. And then the gods got kind of personified in the classical era, they had a little bit more personality. And then we had the God era. So the monotheistic, or in Europe, the Christian era. Yeah, so very simply, we could call the Middle Ages the Christian ages. And then we could call the atheist or the godless ages. And kind of late modernity, sometimes called post-modernity, you'll see sort of weird new religions re-emerging because we can't really be godless. So you'll see this other kind of trend. Sometimes it's called post-modernity. I think late modernity is a better term for it because it's the same tendency, really. Okay, so again, the Enlightenment coming out of the 30 Years' War, people blamed religion for this, essentially what was a national conflict, but blamed on religion. The Reformation, the Protestants saying, no one tells me what to do. And this is a great piece of spin as a sort of founding mythos. Every religion has its founding myth, right? You know, whether it's, I don't know, the gods came down from Mount wherever, or Genesis or whatever. So this is a kind of founding mythos. The Enlightenment came along and saved people from their irrationality. You know, but previous to that, everyone was just sort of stupid, which doesn't really fit the facts when you look at like the amount of learning that was going on in, say, the Catholic Church in Europe. It doesn't fit the facts at all. But it's a nice story. And you might say, yeah, okay, Mark, that's great, but we are living in this materially wonderful time. And you're watching this on the internet. I love the internet. I love dentistry. I've got a problem with my tooth right now. I think I'll just pop round to the local dentist, get that sorted. You know, I won't have to be in pain forever. Yeah. I've traveled the world on cheap flights. You know, this is fantastic. I've loved the technology just as anyone. Yes. Let's say that this is not nothing. Okay. Some people call it the Great Bribe. There's a picture of Judas, never trust a ginger. The great bribe of modernity. So, what do you mean bribe? You know, this is just good, right? Well, it's not psycho-spiritually good. So, think of like levels. This one level would be like The Office. Yeah, I got the British and the original British version and the American version, which is just sort of soulless and grey. You know, hell as uh, what would we call it? The elites of today are sort of managerial elites, it's been called by others. Like they did an interview with Keir Starmer. He said, I don't really dream and I don't have a favorite book or a favorite color. He's just this sort of gray, soulless creature. And that is the mechanization and the removal of the human soul, as it were. I remember I couldn't watch The Office when I was younger because I thought, God, I'm going to work in an office like that. And nothing was more depressing to me. Equally, if we see, like some people call these the saints of modernity, the kind of homeless, drug addicted, there's a level of hell there, which I was in Austin last year. I saw it. I was like, oh my God, this is horrific in a way which um, is hard to imagine. You don't really see it much in Croatia, but the most modern places like Britain and America have this whole class of people who are, I say saints because they're the most modern and the most materialistically orientated in the sense of being kind of fully hooked. They're fully got by materialism, can look like that, which is clearly a kind of hell. If you ever tried to speak to these guys, and I have at times, you know, like when I've helped other alcoholics and stuff, it's like they are in a level of hell, which is, there's no doubt about it. It's like demon possession when you talk to them. And that might not be metaphorical. And there's a sort of real oops to modernity, which immediately happened in the French Revolution. It just became absolutely murderous, absolutely murderous. And the world wars were just absolute modern wars, right? So that was the war of the three types of modernity. We could call them liberalism, fascism, communism. They're all modern. And you know, one of them kind of came out good in the end. Well, two of them came out good in World War II, and then one of them kind of eventually in the 90s came out as the victor. But we're now seeing in the same way as communism imploded, I think we're now seeing the implosion of liberal modernity. Fascism didn't actually have enough time to implode, but I think would have done had it not been defeated militarily. But the world wars are really horrific. So yes, people always had wars and conflict, but there's a level of, it wasn't just a number of people. There's a level of brutality and mechanization. And if you look at, say, wars between Christian countries in the Middle Ages, they were pretty horrific, but there was always this like, hey, we're all Christians. There's this line that we shouldn't cross. Yeah. And in the world wars, it just didn't have that. And afterwards, people tried to make a secular version, Geneva Conventions and things like that. And was that afterwards? I think it was afterwards. That had previous conventions up to that point, but none of them really worked because there wasn't a deep reason for it. So if all you have is stuff, why would you care about that? There's no real morality. So the stuff that was done to people, and we could say under fascism and communism, but liberalism isn't without blood on its hands here, right? There's no doubt about it. And then now we look at the state we're in terms of the things I mentioned, mental health, addictions, just general misery, and the kind of religion of consumer culture that's been put in the place because we need some kind of religion. That this just isn't working. So this is a major oops, right? I think people are getting that now. Like I don't want to even make too hard a case for it. I think there's also a critical point So this is the idea of a tipping point where something like a match is fine until it gets to a certain level of friction and a certain level of heat, and then chemical reaction happens. So you get downward spirals that happened. And I think we've reached a point that didn't exist when I was a kid, which is a point where there's a sort of downward spiral where like I am incredibly well taught up compared to most people in terms of like psychology, mindfulness. I've had lots of martial arts training, spiritual training, lived in monasteries, blah blah. And even with all that stuff, I'm fighting a battle where it's like I win 2 days out of three. Now, again, I've got different genetics to some people, but I think everyone's on the same page now. I think I'm actually better equipped than the average person, even if I've got worse genetics. Bad mental health leads to worse culture, which leads to worse mental health. So that's the vicious cycle. I think this is literally the solution to the Fermi paradox that cultures develop to a certain degree of modernity, develop, I'm going to come back to, and then they get to a certain point and they just stop breeding and implode. And it's a mental health collapse that we see. We used to think maybe it's nuclear war that ends planets. I think it's more like this psycho-spiritual war. And I think this is almost like good news as we're reaching the end of modernity. Like it's reached the end of its logic. Yeah, this is Zachary. I think it's Porcu. I've been absolutely. I've listened to everything he's put on YouTube. He's fantastic. A lot of my thinking on this topic is credit to Zachary. Yeah, I think he does a course on being recovering modern, which I haven't done. He's coming from an Orthodox background, but he says in a way we're all moderns, even if you're I don't know watching this in Africa and you're an Orthodox Christian or whatever, Islamic, whatever. You're gonna have a degree of this modernity. It's just in us all at this point. So this is really strange because our wiring is not for this, right? Our wiring is our biology is we're not that. And you could say that most people in the world today aren't like fully the lead edge of modernity. Like most of your conservative uncles in the Midwest or, the countryside in England or in most of the world, Africa, Russia, they're not as modern as the people who run the West. So the people who run the West are the sort of lead edge of this in the same way as homeless people are. Almost certainly you're pretty deep in it if you're on YouTube watching this, right? Some of this you'd maybe send to kind of like someone in a rural area and they kind of wouldn't get it all, but generally like the thinking kind of lead edge of culture is like super deep in it, even if our biology isn't, and even if there's plenty of people around the world today who still think this is madness, they're being dragged along by elites, but they think the whole thing's crazy. So, what are the core beliefs of modernity? Talking about modernity, this is a cult. Let me say what it is first of all. So, core belief: only stuff exists. So, there's only stuff. It's actually a ridiculous belief if you're conscious, for example. If you think, I don't know, beauty and love and things like that matter, this is a completely ridiculous notion. Open your eyes. Modern scientific kind of materialism has no explanation for what consciousness is, just none at all. It's a complete mystery, and it's literally the most obvious thing in your life. But this is the weird belief at the core of it. And obviously it closes down other ways of knowing. So John Vervaeke's been very influential on me on ways of knowing that we're saying that actually sort of science or scientism, it's only about the data, show me the numbers. This is the kind of managerial way of running a country, right? Like what is the price of a beautiful, I don't know, unpolluted British river? Well, it's hard to say, right? Because it's not everything's measurable. The other piece that comes with this is radical individualism. It actually goes even deeper into the individual, into sort of psych individualism. So it's not even the body we'll come to later. But this idea that it's just about individual people. These are kind of like the core, the absolute core of it. So yes, it's materialism, right? So if I talk about modernity and materialism, yes, it means like, people shop loads and stuff. The importance of money to people, money is all that matters. And there's been a reason that every traditional religion has warned us that you can't serve God and mammon. So this is definitely a part of it. This kind of the left brain way of seeing the world as dead. So I interviewed Ian McGilchrist, who was amazing, actually, really wise man, really fun as well, generous. One of my favorite guests of all time on the podcast. I think it's episode 700 or something. It talks about the kind of this left brain way of seeing the world where everything's dead, right? So that this is a dead world to be manipulated. That is the essence of materialism, of modernity. And sometimes like Max Weber, the sociologist, Weber, what did you say? I don't know. He talks about the disenchantment of the world lost its magic, whether that be the magic of the kind of, pagan, pre-Christian times, or, medieval people were living in this Well, that was very different. I was just reading Charles Taylor yesterday, a Canadian philosopher, and he talks about just how different the world is compared to people living in medieval times. So the meaning has got stripped out of the world, the magic, the narrative. There's so many ways of saying it. It's quite hard for us to get our head around because we are moderns. So core issue, making it simple, is objectification. You've heard of like sexual objectification, but objectification is like human resources, right? You're a resource in a company. You're not a human being. You're a human doing. You're an object. Okay. And this, what are we objectifying in modernity? My own personal way into this, I discovered embodiment, which is you realize your own body isn't an object. It's part of your humanity, part of your being, which is actually John Paul II would agree with. This took me a while to figure that out, but the idea of the body as a gateway to something bigger, the body as a key aspect of our personhood, not just like a meat taxi. Yeah, not hunk of meat that we just drive around with our little cognitive brain. So it was my way into it, but objectification actually goes deeper than that. It objectifies ourselves, but it also objectifies the whole world, right? So it objectifies other people. So people just become objects that serve our needs. Ecologically speaking, so the pagans would be very keen to stress this part, the environment, and it says there's no God, there's no spirit, there's no special anything. It's all just stuff. So this is my map. It's called the Tetrarchy Rule of Four. This is the best map I've come up with as to what makes a human being function well. So we're co-regulated, eco-regulated, theo-regulated, and self-regulated, right? Modern psychology stresses self-regulation, but they're generally missing the other stuff, and it's not really enough. So if a baby's crying, we don't say, do some yoga, right? We co-regulate the baby, okay? Sing to the baby, move with the baby, hug the baby, do all that good stuff, because that's part of being human. Equally, you could have the best psychologist in the world, but if you lived in a concrete building with no windows and never went outside, you would be insane. Yeah. So the eco part of it's there. And what they find in 12-step work, like Alcoholics Anonymous, is that in order to deal with really hardcore psychological problems like addiction or like what everyone has now in the world, you essentially need some higher power, they call it. And this is just off the table in modern psychology. So modern psychology is basically nihilistic, follows materialism in saying nothing exists. I read Nietzsche when I was 17 and almost went insane from it, right? Because it's the idea that this we create meaning. There's no meaning inherent in the world. The world is just stuff. And this is the kind of doomer philosophy in many ways. You're seeing a kind of rise of sort of Nietzschean stuff on YouTube. Some fun people, doing sort of weightlifting and Nietzschean stuff. Young Nietzscheans, I see them who think that, what, meaning is just something we create for ourselves. Yeah, pretty dark worldview, and it doesn't really sustain people. That's the key thing. It didn't sustain Nietzsche. It didn't sustain me when I was in that worldview. It's not sustaining the world now. So profound ethical implications to seeing other people as human doings, not human beings. John Vervaeke talks about the being versus having mode, or being versus doing mode, you'll sometimes hear. So the sort of materialist way of looking at things is that you're doing and you're having, right, as opposed to being and relating. So Kant talked about not treating people as means to an end, i.e. not tools. This goes back to McGilchrist, but seeing people as ends in themselves, right? That they are inherently good, which is also a Christian way of looking at the world. We have inherent dignity. Whereas a nihilistic view says, no, we're all just stuff getting in each other's way to be used. So basic materialism, the sort of chase the money. I don't think so many people are into this. I mean, you'll see it on YouTube, like, people like Mosey encouraging kids just to make a load of money. And actually, you heard him comparing himself to a slave the other day. He said, slaves worked all day, so I can work all day. I'm like, okay, so you're self-enslaved. That's just bizarre. Like, what are you making all this money for? I mean, it's nice to be rich, it's nice to be well off. I do okay, but it's like, what for? Right? Like, what's the meaning behind all this? And you will see that sort of maxing. You got to be careful. You don't just want to get into like resentment and jealousy. A lot of people that criticize the rich don't love the poor. They just hate the rich. You got to be careful of that. That's to requote Orwell. But yeah, as someone that has had money at one point, and I do okay now, I had real money at one point. It's fun, it's nice, but it doesn't add real meaning. So I think most people don't need this one pushing. If they've been around a little bit, they've realized that it's just not everything in life. Yeah, so the sort of the Bugatti thing's sort of immature, isn't it? You know, the material body, like look beautiful, you know. I've been in great shape at times. It's fun, you know, but it's like whatever. So this sort of thing that's being sold has got an immaturity to it. So, you know, bodily materialism again is disembodiment, right? So seeing your body as an object, and yeah, there's much been admired in these guys. There's Jay Cutler, is it, and Ronnie. You know, so they're like nice guys, and they've got some wisdom in them. But the average Jim that just sees the body as a machine, treats yourself as a machine. This is the heart, in a way, is the lack of heart of materialism. Is to the first thing we objectify is ourselves, right? We objectify ourselves, and we objectify other people, then the world. So, like, I've just really got a lot from embodied practice, and you can do embodied weightlifting, by the way. If you talk about mind muscle connection, you know, the idea of being really present in the weightlifting rather than being in the gym watching TV kind of thing. So, yeah, but objectifying yourself is often the beginning of this, and we've really seen this come to kind of absurd, uh, freakish levels, I would say, in kind of recent years as modernity kind of develops. Yeah. Most of you, though, are probably not caught in this. You're probably caught in this. So, social materialism, it's not matter in the sense of just stuff, but it's like status, fame, you know, or getting the kudos in different ways. This is what most people are caught in. It's an economy, and it's, you know, it's materialistic in the sense of we're being offered kind of social material. It's the social bonuses, the likes, and this is really a big part of the modern world. Like a lot of what people do is for status. Look at Will Storm. Right, they're setting off fireworks here in Croatia. Brings me back. Okay, so social materialism, which is yeah, what a lot of people are after. Whew, it's going to take a breath. I'm not a huge fan of fireworks. I've worked in six war zones, so it's a hell of a thing. All right, idols. I'll be hiding under the bed like the cat later. This is another one. I like this guy, bottom right there. Oh, I forget his name. He's a Harvard professor talking about this. We have different idols. I was in a hotel room in Holland. There's a picture that had literally had a golden calf in every hotel room. I was like, do they get what this means? We can look at this through a Christian lens, you know, security, comfort, approval, power. Some of these are more like social, but others they go into other areas like hedonistic pleasure. I'm going to come to approval, control. Idol is anything that we're worshiping not worthy of worship. Okay, so because we have to worship something, we have this urge in us as human beings. We are prone to idolatry, which doesn't mean a literal golden cow, unless you're in that hotel in Harlem. It means these things. Like, could be a football team, right? Something pop star, something we worship, which isn't worthy of our. It's not. It shouldn't be top of the values hierarchy. It isn't the most important thing. In Buddhist model, this is the worldly wins. They talk about, you know, being immune to praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, prestige and disgrace. It's basically what I just said. Okay. And there's even a sort of spiritual materialism. So there's even a spiritual version of this, which some of my favorite comedians, like these guys with the hats, are doing a roast battle you can find online where your blood type is cacao. You know, I've seen plenty of this in Bali, and, you know, you'll see it in Thailand, you'll see it in Berlin. Where else will you see it? Boulder, all the B places, Brighton in the UK. And it's very consumeristic. There's no real authority behind it. And this is the whole like spiritual but not religious. It's interesting. JP Spears started taking the piss out of this, and eventually he's become much more kind of right-leaning traditionalist. He's a funny guy. He's bottom right, and this is like a lot of my friends I've grown up with. A lot of my colleagues will say spiritual but not religious, right? That's not really cutting it anymore. If you see this sort of narcissistic, you know, yoga influencer, yeah, I don't know who this girl is, but it's that sort of vibe. That doesn't really cut it anymore. Chogyam Trungpa talked about this in the 60s, but I think we've really seen the blossoming of it with social media. So this is another kind of idolatry, essentially, and isn't genuine spirituality. The sort of cheapest version of the way is hedonism, right? This is the main god of our culture. I mean, fame is a big god, but hedonism is another one. And this is just what's left when we don't believe in anything. So all the different things, the corn, you know, whether it's the sort of a girl doing loads of shopping or, you know, Michelin star restaurants, it's sort of high end versions, right down to the kind of low end versions. It's all the same thing. Okay, it's temporary pleasure. You know, so it's not about being anti-pleasure, right? But if you make that a god, whether it's doing all the retreats and, you know, getting spiritual highs, or whether it's the constantly gaming online. There's a sort of crossover of hedonism and just plain distraction, I would say, as well. And this is what we're encouraged to do by the culture. This is what the culture sells us. This is what keeps capitalism going around. Various levels of this, depending on where we are in society, how much money we've got. This is what we're asked, but it doesn't really work, right? That's me as an alcoholic druggie, bottom left, and I've had issues with dating and all sorts of things over the years, and it leads to hell. Like hedonism, how's that working out for you, as Dr. Phil would say? Doesn't end well, right? Yeah, there's neurological reasons for this. I have a slide with Anna Lemke. So I had Anna Lemke on the podcast who's wrote Dopamine Nation. She said just very neurologically, physiologically, if you pursue nothing but pleasure, you will end up in nothing but pain. There's a reason traditional cultures have had periods like fasting and celibacy, because you need to reset that system. You need to reset the system. You need the cold showers or whatever it is, a little bit of hardship. And our culture just says, materialistic culture says, no, 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 just as much ease and pleasure as possible. And that just makes us weak and miserable, which is hell. Yeah, so it doesn't work out. In some ways, I think this is good news. So in addiction recovery, we talk about rock bottom. So if an alcoholic comes to work with me and says, "Hey, I want you to sponsor me. You've been sober years and years and years. Do you want to? I'd love to be sober like you." I say, "Okay." If they hit rock bottom, and this is a sort of psycho-emotional point. It doesn't necessarily mean they're homeless or, I've got friends in AA who've killed people in blackout and been put in prison or driven a car into just horrible things. But it can just be like a spiritual sense. Like I personally, I just woke up and one day, this was like 19 years ago, I just had enough. And I think modernity has had enough. Like this is why we're seeing so much interest in spiritual things again. And even though it's sometimes misdirected, and this is good news. So it sounds like I'm like hitting you guys with a hardcore black pill, but I would say, actually pretty good news. All right. Yes, we are still recording. Awesome. All right. So good. Yeah. So is modernity religion? I'm saying it's a cult. Let's start by saying it's a religion, and the cult you can think of as kind of like a subset of that. Well, a religion doesn't necessarily mean belief in a big ultimate authority, higher power God. It usually does, and we'll come to see the one shortly, the one of modernity. It looks like it doesn't have one, but it does. But it's a moral order. It's a way of saying what's right and wrong, what you should and shouldn't do. It's a way of making sense of the world. So I look at religion in this really big sense. I mean, the word religion actually is a very Western idea. We said there was secular and there was religion. We kind of made this split in modernity. And actually, a lot of cultures wouldn't even understand that. Like Hindus, for example, they didn't think of what they were doing as Hinduism until the British came along and said, "Oh, what's your religion?" And they, "Oh, I guess, this is just how we live." So it's a way of living, it's a way of making sense of the world, it's a way of ordering the world. And then there's other things that come with that, like a priestly class, taboos, rituals, etc. And modernity has all of those. So psychologists are one of the big priestly classes. This is why I'm addressing the issue of psychology in particular because it's my own background, it's my own work, and I think they're one of the biggest priestly classes who are kind of stopping us healing this situation, frankly. Yeah, so modernity is interesting as a religion because it says it isn't a religion. And you'll get this in some other cults. And Scientology will say we're not a religion, or they'll say we're not. I'm not sure if Scientology does, but certain other ones will say we're not a religion, but they are. They effectively are in the meaning making, the sense making, the ordering of the world. I think this kind of pseudo religious nature or deceptive nature of it is why it's sort of terrible as a religion is because it says it's not. There's a difficulty in that. There's a trickiness in that. Again, that quote about the devil saying he doesn't exist. Yeah, the religion of no discussion. It disguises its lack of neutrality. It's biased, it's got perspective, it's got gods, it's got priests, but it says, no, 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 we don't. Therefore, we're better than all the other religions. But we're definitely not one. Yeah, like that's part of what you'll hear. You'll still hear like new atheist types kind of claim this. It's like, guys, really? So back to this quote again. Okay, so it's the anti-cult code. So there's a huge resistance to this critique. I know when I brought it up with people, I hope I don't sound defensive and teach this, but when I brought it up with people, they're like, no, no, it's definitely not, because it prides itself in this. Like I remember when I used to run embodiment coach trainings in person. I still do online, but we've always had like multiple teachers on our courses, right? And people were always worried it was a cult. And I was like, but when I'm not this some guru. They'll say, you'd think you're a guru. I've heard there's a whole podcast and it's awful. BBC slash Channel 4 journalist, this sort of preppy girl. What was her name? She did a whole thing on like gurus and the new gurus. And basically, a guru is anyone who gave advice who wasn't approved by the system. Particularly if they gave advice on the internet. Oh my God. So we have a hyper-vigilance to cults and gurus. And that's part of what keeps this particular cult in place. Now, I mean, obviously, there are genuine gurus out there you might want to be careful of, but it's not a dirty word, actually. All right. So Bob Dylan said you've got to serve someone. Love that song. Or Jordan Peterson said there's a values hierarchy. Something has to be top of the values hierarchy. For what? For what? Why? We could keep asking that question until we come to our ultimate good. And when you see that in people's behavior, like a drug addict, eventually everything in their life serves that one thing. And they kind of hate themselves for it, right? Because they know what they're doing is wrong. And they'll steal from their own mother and then regret it. But everything is orientated behaviorally, even if whatever they say, behaviorally to an ultimate good. So we can say in modernity, well, you have to worship. So what are we worshipping? Right? Like this is a human thing to worship, and you have to have a top of the values hierarchy. Just logically, you do. So it's like, what are we, worshipping in this cult of modernity? Um, I would say ourselves. It took me a while to figure out. I was thinking, looking at modernity, things. Hey, it's a bit cult-like. It's a bit like a religion, but it doesn't have a higher power. It doesn't have in cults, it's a sort of an absolute, all-knowing, unquestionable guru. And what is that in modernity? Well, it's ourself. Yeah, this is narcissist, the myth. It's the old myth of he fell in love with his own reflection. Christopher Lash is good on this, his books. That we are in an age of narcissism, in a culture of narcissism that says, you're God. You are the ultimate authority. You've got it all worked out. You don't need to listen to religion. You don't need a higher power. You're the big girl boss of you. And I don't think that's working very well. My own experience is, I remember when I was still drinking, I came to someone who was sober. I was like, no, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to do this myself. And it's like, oh, okay, really? Really? Okay. Good luck. Good luck with that. Good luck. At a certain point, you kind of realize and you throw in the towel. But it's a really bitter pill if you're raised in this cult to realize that you're not the center of the universe, and that making yourself the center of the universe and this unquestionable higher power is super unhealthy, is ridiculous, in fact. It just leads to hell. So this is the god of modernity, essentially. There's others like hedonism, pleasure, ease, physicality, money, all the idols, but I think this is the central one when you look at it ultimately. It's interesting when you have any argument with moderns about any topic, let's say abortion, right? You can make a case for it, against it, there's this, there's that. I've got my own personal opinion, but what it always comes down to is I just want to do what I want to do. That's what it always comes down to. Yeah, and this is a huge break from tradition, community source. It's a break in trust, which is actually a definition of trauma. It's interesting. Croatia's less modern in the way than you can. There's a church near my house. It might start ringing at some point, actually. And I remember asking my mate in a church. I said, mate, why does this ring so loudly so often? Because it's not just calling for mass. It's like regularly throughout the day, for no reason I can think of. I was like, I don't like it. And he just looked at me like I was mental. He said, it's our tradition. And he didn't need a bigger explanation than that. Now, there's dangers there, right? What if it's a bad tradition? Maybe it came from a time when people didn't have watches. Now we have watches. But that was enough for him. And the idea that I don't like it, to him, was just bizarre. It was like an odd thing. He had like that basic trust in his people and his community and his faith and where he comes from. And source. I use the word source if God's an uncomfortable word. Like we come from somewhere. And yeah, it was just odd to him. It was interesting to see. So this I'm the boss of me, right? It's a kids program, but it's also like books on career. And I Googled it. There's loads of things that come under I'm the boss of me. It's like no one tells me what to do. It's kind of teenage, right? Kind of teenage. And this is also the essence of Satanism, I'm told, is do what they want. This is Crowley. The only law is to do what you want. And yeah, this is the sort of, in kind of Christian kind of way of looking at the world. This is like the devil. It's just do what you want, do what you feel like. You hear people now worship feeling. That's a late modernity thing. It's feeling. It used to be facts, now it's feelings. And they just don't want to do what they want the whole time. I want to do exactly what I want to do when I want to do it. It's the id, right? It's bizarre that this has become the nature of the world. And it's also very seductive, right? And this is evil. This is absolutely evil. And notice how evil is a naughty word. We can't get away from morality there, because if you say it's a naughty word, let's say someone says you're problematic. What are they really saying is you're bad. right? They just don't want to say it. Or you hear Buddhists say it's unskillful. I mean, you mean bad, right? And it's like, well, not exactly. And they'll try and get out of it, but it's like, well, evil is just a strong way of saying this. Like, should we hurt children? No, hurting children is bad. Okay, so we all agree there's a thing called bad. And my experience in war zones really brought this to the fore. Some of the horrific things. I just gone, okay, evil exists. We can't just pretend it doesn't. Yeah, so Anna Lemke, I mentioned earlier, so various neuroscientists have said it just doesn't lead to happiness. So even if your only goal was personal happiness, which I don't think is the meaning of life, but let's say your goal was just to be happy, that's the big burger that I'm actually close to dinner. That does look pretty good, but the big burger we're offered in life, the sweeties, is it will make you happy, and actually that's just not true anyway. Even if that were the meaning of life, right? Like I've really tried. And I've tried it with substances, I've tried it with women, I've tried it with breath work and spiritual experiences, and it just doesn't work because there's a way in which our dopamine gets depleted, and then we feel more miserable. Then we're chasing it. We're chasing that addiction. There's a great YouTube video on that called Nuggets of a little bird chasing an addiction, and it shows you how it works as an addict. And this is how we're wired. So the anti-culture, which is broken down in this book, How to Become Human, Guide for Young Men, is the idea of, this is modernity. Okay, the anti-culture is modernity. I call it the anti-culture. I don't think it deserves the word culture. It's against culture. And it puts ourself at the center of the universe. And this is alienating from other people. We're dysregulated from our environment because that's stripped of beauty and meaning. And there's no gods. Nothing means anything. And this is just a horrible way to live. I don't think people can sustain this. Yeah. Yeah, what does it lead to? Slavery, hence the addiction, but also externally, the kind of control is one of the things that comes with this. Misery just doesn't offer us the happiness it pretends, and ultimately death, like it's an antenatal philosophy, and it's so psychologically bad for us that in terms of self-ending and other risk-taking behaviors. So, yeah, slavery, misery, death. That's the wages of sin. That's the wages of modernity because it's the same, even though it's super seductive, like, oh God, it's hard to stay off your phone, isn't it? But seduction means different things. It could be that tasty looking cheeseburger that I know is terrible for me. It could be, it was in my younger years, it was definitely women for a while. And, whether it's little things that you think don't really harm you, but do, right up to kind of heroin and just awful behavior. So it's very seductive. And we don't really, if you start talking about sacrifice versus seduction, it's very difficult, very difficult. It's like your bank offers you a loan. It's like you're going to have to pay it back with interest, but it's tempting, isn't it? You're selling the future, to quote Jonathan Peugeot, with that loan. And essentially all kind of like cheap dopamine hits are like that. Yeah, offers Eve create weakness and addiction and misery. So that's the lie. The devil comes with this is modernity just highlights the nature of how things how we're made weak and addicted and enslaved. And some of this is kind of historical cycles that we go in this period of decadence of weak men that have been created by easy times. And yeah, there's some of it's period of time, but modernity is also additional to this, I would say. And another piece it does, it keeps us immature. So it's only in the acceptance of sacrifice that someone grows up. Like someone gets married, they accept they're sacrificing their relationships to all other women for one woman. That's actually what makes you happy in that sense. But it's, I've tried the polyamorous thing, whatever. And you see this with the like woke guys who just look like big babies. But even like some sort of, laddie guys on getting drunk in England, and it's like we just had Christmas, and you see like 40-year-olds really drunk in the street in England, and it's just sort of sad. So yes, it's like the kids who dress up at cosplay conventions, which might have a fun side, but playing with games as a kid, I get it. Warhammer's fun, but as a way of life, as a way of meaning making, and you can feel it. I often hear women complain about this. I say men particularly are very immature. And I've had conversations with students, with colleagues, and I've gone, "You're behaving like a teenager," and that is kind of consumer capitalism's great trick, is it keeps us all as sort of teenagers having fun. We're uninitiated. And you see, maturity doesn't just happen with age. And people are trying to initiate, right? Like in unhealthy ways, like gangs, or healthy ways, like, do jiu-jitsu, trying to get a black belt. I did the whole black belt martial arts thing. It's an attempted initiation. My work in war zones, I think, was an attempted initiation. I was seeking that danger to go, okay, let's put a gun to the head and understand that life is short and meaningful. modernity doesn't understand the communal and the sacred natures of maturation. And you'll see that like jiu-jitsu, they have like rituals, will hit you with the bell, and gangs will have rituals, and people are attempting it in these ways, but the modernity has destroyed the actual structures of that. Obviously, some groups have it more than others. You'll see, like, I think that even like the average bar mitzvah now or something is still just more like a party. It's more about modernity than the actual spirituality of it. Yeah, and you also see this in like you see the difference in how people look now versus then. Some of this is we take better care of ourselves and the clothes people wear. There's interesting YouTube videos on this, but I don't think it's just that. Like, there's a way in which we don't look grown up anymore. I look at my dad and my granddad, pictures of them with my age. Like, I'm 46, right? And last time, what's that? A lot younger. Oh, thanks for saying that. Just because I cut my beard. No, but I look at pictures of my dad and my granddad when they're my age, and they just look so much more mature. Like, I checked my watch. Last I checked my watch, I was like 25, and I'm like, what the hell? Where's my life gone? And I just feel like not ready for the big responsibilities. It's like, come on, if you're not ready at 46, when are you ready? And I'm told I'm more responsible than a lot of people my age. So there's a childlike nature that we're kept in, the internal suckling child. And this is convenient, right? This is convenient for governments, for corporations, in terms of sort of psychology industry of just drugging people is the material solution to a lot of psychological problems. It's very convenient that we are these childlike creatures that can't stand on our own 2 feet. So it's the substitute for God and community is quite pleased in a way, I would say. And you can be conspiratorial about this, or you can just say it's sort of evolved that way, but it does seem to be the nature of modernity. Right. So is it a cult? Okay. Is it a cult? So it isolates people. Absolutely. It's the ultimate isolation in a way, and it's individualism. Can you leave it? One of the big features, I've studied this, and there's people say cult this, cult that, but there are actual definite features. Like, one of them is you try and leave, they'll come after you in a cult. They just try and stop. Like, Islam, we could say, is a cult because of how they treat apostates, right? Like, that is a very particular thing. Yeah, you can't leave as easily a cult. People come after you, and that is definitely the truth of modernity. If you start denying some of the main truths of modernity, you will be punished for it. There is very little room for questioning or discussion in the average company around some of the things, in the average government, in the average society as exists today. So I'd say it's definitely got that. And it definitely wants excessive control of members' lives. And we're seeing a level of intrusion, surveillance with late modernity that just hasn't ever existed before. It wasn't technologically possible, but it makes sense from the view of managerial modernity. What about the ideal cause or leader? The top thing of the cult? Well, that's narcissism again, right? So the charismatic leader is you. You are the charismatic, infallible leader. Your opinion is the only thing that matters. It's like independent. This is the lie of modernity. It indoctrinates everyone, but tells them, oh, you came up with all these conclusions yourself. It's like when you're listening to your social justice friends saying the same thing you've heard from a million other people, using the same words and phrases, but they're like super original. I used to follow a band called the Levelers when I was young, great British folk pop band. And I went to their concert, and they got a song called One Way of Life. And everyone sings it in unison, dressed the same, jumping up and down all together. And I'm like, okay, it's not quite Nuremberg. There's a bit more variety than the Nuremberg rallies, but it's not far off. There's an irony in that. Others have pointed this one out. There's only one. It's a good song. It's a good song. Anyway, not the worst people, but kind of funny that even the way out of modernity starts to have this conformist cult-like quality. It's pretty dogmatic. You look at cancel culture, the kind of one of the religions of late modernity, the sort of Marxist, sort of fake Christian kind of cancel culture. Yeah, this definitely discourages dissent. I've been severely punished in my industry for having, even when I had like fairly moderate views. Now I think I'd be considered an extremist, but by the point of view, like years ago, when I had the first cancellation attempts against me, I was like, I'm a moderate, not even conservative at that point. Yeah, now it'd probably be fair enough. But at the time, I was like, this is ridiculous. And you will see, but it's the constant mocking of religious people, like that opening ceremony of the Olympics. Just any chance they get, what's his face, Sam Smith, just any chance they get, you will see a lot of the features of the cult. We are saved. What does modernity have as a mind-altering technique? Like advertising, the whole of the culture in a way. So just if you go away in the woods for a week, you'll feel high just because the they live signal. Oh, I should have had a they live slide. The they live signal has stopped. If you can just cut yourself off from the signal of sort of modernity, advertising, consumer culture, you just feel amazing. You literally can sit in a room meditating or go in the woods, and when the mind altering, the mind sort of altering nature of it. I remember I stayed in a Buddhist monastery for like 25 days. On the way out, I went to the nearest train station, and there was an advert on the train station wall. And I was like, this is gross. It seemed, it was an advert for something relatively benign, like insurance or something, but it just seemed disgusting to me. It just seemed disgusting that I was someone who didn't have my interests at heart was trying to get me to do something I didn't want to do. And this is everywhere now. And it's advertising, but it's also like the subtle feeling of modernity. Like think of what it feels like to be in a shopping mall. Like I walk through a shopping mall, it's like, gross, you know. Or I was in central London, having been living in Slovenia and Croatia, and it was gross. You know, there's a mind numbing, altering technique, and it definitely has its way of inducing fear in everyone. Like, you know, anxiety is fear. Anxiety is the most common psychological problem today. That, as I said, our psychological institutions have certainly not solved. So that is induced by modernity. You don't have enough. You're not enough. You need to buy more. This is absolutely induced. And of course, it's terrifying to be on your own, right? Like to be um, the modern materialist worldview that there's no meaning exists. You're utterly on your own and you're going to die. It's terrifying, absolutely terrifying. So of course, yeah, it's fear inducing, and you should feel guilty and ashamed if you have any kind of other leanings towards spirituality, community, etc. Okay, so what is sacred? Hyper individualism, the individual, that's sacred in modernity. So again, if we're doing psychology from this point of view of the hyper individual, A, it won't work because it's inadequate anthropology. And there's a sort of sacred commitment to that. The same as with freedom, right? So it's like you have to have choices. It's all about choices. Choice is the most important thing. So why? Like there's times in my life I've been happier when I didn't have so much choice. You learn this when you work with kids. I used to work with kids a lot and outdoor education. And if you give them too many choices, they're just miserable. They say, "What do you want for dinner?" You can have anything. Kids freak out. You say, "Okay, do you want nuggets or pizza?" All right, whatever. Yeah. There's also this salvation kind of narrative that's there, the idea of salvation through progress. This is actually a Christian idea that's been recycled. There's one way of looking at modernity. It's kind of a Christian heresy in some ways. It's just riding on the back of Christianity. That this is an idea of progress technologically, but also, I'm going to come back to this, also in terms of sort of ideologically, and saved people and groups. You see, like, you know, George Floyd or whatever was really put up as a saint. Even, I don't know what he was, but he certainly wasn't a saint. And there's certain groups that are sacred, and, you know, the latest thing that's sacred. Um, yeah, Matt Walsh, no relation, is very good at sort of putting his finger on some of these things. And he points at what's sacred. Like, no, they don't actually know what a woman is, but yet they're really going on about it. The choice thing is really important. I want to kill my babies. It's like, really? That's sacred to you? Racism. This is the evils of modernity, right? It has its evils. It has its sacred cows. It has its priestly groups, like, I don't know, woke figures who tell you what's right and wrong, or people on the media. And of course, Hitler, the devil. Going to come to the World War II consensus in a minute, but we've got devil as well in modernity now. Okay, back to psychology. So the priests, there's a lot of priests in modernity, but I'd say psychologists are some of the main ones. So, you know, academics would be another big one, the expert, and people who know the right language, but I'd say psychologists are one of the main ones. You see, like, young people are obsessed with psychology, all self-diagnosing themselves and using bizarre language. I had a conversation with someone today that was just unbearable because they kept I saying, "Look, we're just two people having a chat. Let's work it out." And they kept going to this, like, you know, everyone's a narcissist, everyone's this, everyone's that. It's unbearable. So the priests are the ones that have special access to the sacred, special access to the individual, particularly the individual mind. So that's psychologists. Yeah. So this also includes like coaches, yoga teachers, mindfulness teachers. There's lots of things around the periphery of this. Like I'm around a lot. The coaches, for example, they're basically psychologists by another name. Not the first person who said this. There's been various people from Jung, Foucault. Who else has said this? One of the old popes said that like therapy has become a religion. They mean not just therapy, but all of psychology, I would say, including sort of new age branches and branches that aren't necessarily about pathology. You know, therapy tends to be about what's wrong with you. Secular authority. It's interesting. Years ago, a couple of years ago now, I went on the podcast Trigonometry. Was treated very well, was fed steak, nice guys, lovely studio. I don't know who pays for it, but it was lovely. And I was there and they said, well, what are you? Because they wanted me to talk about trauma in Ukraine. I'd come back from Ukraine. And I was like, yeah, I can talk about that, no problem. And it was a good interview, well done, well looked after. But they said, right at the beginning, they said, how do we describe you? And I said, oh, well, I teach embodiment. They said, well, what's that? We need to give you an impressive name, was the sense. And you'll see this with not just them, but most podcasts. I don't want to pick on those guys, but most podcasts will have neuroscientist says, or Anna Lemke, MD, right? The MD is important there. Neuroscientist says, it might be direct student of the Dalai Lama. That's less common, but generally it's something sciencey. Yeah, so it's human lab. The lab part is important. It's something that adds credibility. Like mindfulness got a lot of credibility. We say, oh, it's not just spiritual, it's material, it's scientific. We're using the method, right? So it doesn't really matter about your experience, skill sets. It's all about your qualifications. And they'll have someone on almost any podcast, and they'll try and establish this secular priest-like authority. And it's not always bad, people would say, oh yeah, and it's just the fact that someone's been to Harvard. It might indicate something, but it also indicates that they've been part of the process of modernity. They've jumped through the right hoops. They've done the right exams. Doesn't mean they're stupid or anything or bad, but it certainly means they play the game. It certainly means they're approved. And like to get on the BBC, for example, you have to have the tick. You have to be approved. Okay, so modern types of authority, you'll see this on all the major podcasts like Diary of a CEO or Williamson. Again, no disrespect to any of these people, but it's always that attempt to assert the priestly authority, usually through science, if they're in the modern stage. Now, late modern, so you've got Peterson and Gabor as two psychologists. Gabor I've interviewed a couple of times. They will do it differently. So they've got a little bit more like religious quality, or this quality of late modernity is looking for meaning. And again, not always bad, but the authority comes from, yes, I'm a professor, or it can come from life experience sometimes in late modernity. For example, if it's extreme life experience. So like Navy SEAL says, that's another one you'll get on podcasts. Right? Navy SEAL says, okay, they've had some sort of extreme experience which has proven something. It's proven they're tough, they can work hard, and we'll want to listen to people that have proven something. So priests are also comedians in late modernity. As it breaks down, the clown comes back in. So Rogan and Rogan's crew, a lot of them are comedians, and a lot of it's like comedians' opinions on things, and it's like Jimmy Carr's opinion on masculinity. I'm like, why? I mean, he tells funny jokes. He tells a good joke. I like his one-liners. He's fun, but he's a good comedian. But I don't really want to hear his views on masculinity. I don't think it's his thing. So this is weird kind of way in which we now listen to the clown, because a lot of the trust has broken down. So modernity's said, oh, you should trust the experts, trust the science, trust the professors, trust the Harvard people. And we've gone, I'm not so fucking sure, particularly post-COVID. We've been lied to so much. We've understood that the manufacture of consent, as Chomsky would say, happens through experts and the legitimacy we give them. The left and the right, hence I've got Peterson and Gabor here, both have their kind of priests. And there's a sort of worship-like quality. Like a lot of people train with Gabor, and they just think being close to him, somehow the magic's going to rub off, so they do have this kind of, people go to Peterson's lectures and you'll see this kind of worship like quality there. I know I'm not blaming him for it. I don't think he encourages it even, but people put that on him, that's for sure. And as I said, in late modernity it all gets a bit weird because we lose trust in the sort of authority of science and the kind of people that are generally on Huberman or Williamson or whatever. Again, no disrespect to any of these people. I was on Williamson years ago. He seemed like a nice guy. No disrespect to Huberman. He gets those ladies. Don't know about the Diary of a CEO guy. So psychology is salvation. That's really what we're looking at in modernity, that you just have to do the work, they call it. You can endless salvation through soteriology, it's called in religious studies. Endless psychologically progress, constantly looking at your issues. People were in analysis 3 times a week for years. That was the original Western psychological method. And now we can't afford psychoanalysis 3 times a week, most people, but they're on TikTok every day. They're looking at the YouTube videos every day. It's nervous system this, nervous system that. And it just leads to self-obsession and misery. So do these people actually have a deeper authority? That is up for question right now. As modernity breaks down, like, what is authority? Is it a Navy SEAL? Is it a comedian? Is it a Harvard neuroscientist? Well, they're all offering something, But where does real authority come from? So traditionally, it was the tradition. It's tried and tested, right? And what's the basis of their morality? Like most psychologists daren't even talk about morality. How do they bring meaning in? So there's people like Peterson and Viveki who are trying, but for most psychologists, this is just off the table. They don't have a language of it. And where's the community? Where's the community aspect? It's always about the individual and the individual, even if it's the individual meaning making. Existential psychologists, where's that's the meaning was never made by the individual. It's a community affair. So most psychology reasserts material individualism. It reasserts this alienation. I mean, okay, again, there's people out there who might talk a little bit like nature is good, but it's still good for you. Yeah, it's co-regulation is good. You get it from a therapist once a week. No, you don't. You don't, and it's not for you. Yeah. Again, have a look at this book if you want to really black pill yourself on that. So there's taboos, right? So anything not measurable is a taboo. Like Huberman Labs is always about the data. Show me the data. Show me the data. Again, not bad because it's better than people just making it up. One way of knowing, but it's not the only way of knowing. It's not the only way of knowing. What it's absolutely taboo is tribe and faith. So these are two of the big ones that were just thrown out in modernity, particularly after the wars. So this picture I thought was very interesting on top of the British Lion during the protests recently marches under Tommy Robinson was a guy with a cross in one hand and a British flag in the other. And it's so old school. And it's so, even that phrase, old school, like we've made progress since then. That's the narrative, right? And it was like, okay, some things needs to be reintegrated here. Something is changing. This is one of the, I'd say like of 2025, like the most important photograph in the UK. Yeah. Like if you want, like, what's a taboo? Like you ask people, what's too much freedom? Like there's no such thing as too much freedom. I was listening to an interview with a young woman recently saying that, young women are so worried that they'll lose their freedom. They'll be stuck with the wrong guy. They'll be trapped with the wrong guy. It's all about freedom. People should be free to do what they want to do. And it's, yeah, without freedom, without responsibility. That's the seductive offer of modernity. And it's why it blows people's mind when you say what's too much freedom. It's not a question they can imagine. In the same way as we co-regulate, to use a modern psychological term, tribally. We do that with our people. I was just in the UK visiting and it was so nice. I mean, just being in Costa and there was a girl there who like kind of had my sense of humor and bit banter as she was delivering the coffee. I was like, oh, this feels so nice. It's not that I don't like the exotic. I've lived in many countries, studied many cultures, but there's something just deeply at home. And there's a nostos, the Greeks would say, a homecoming after the Trojan War about just bantering with someone in a pub or a coffee shop in England. Yeah, now that it's not that I'm deliberately giving like Costa coffee, right? A kind of a shallow example because we're living in cultural poverty in modernity. Yeah, I'm using like the girl in Costa as an example, not, the fact that I'm surrounded by people I grew up with who all have very common, traditions and culture. I've lived around various kind of groups in Ethiopia, for example, and you'll see a very different type of co-regulation. The idea that therapy can replace that with once a week talk therapy, fucking like the arrogance of that is bizarre to me. It's very co-regulation is everything cultural. It's a nice cup of tea and a sit down. It's a drink in a pub with your mate. It's hearing a certain kind of music. It's the food. It's like I had English breakfast when I was in England, and it was like, oh, this is so nice. I don't care if the calories are rubbish, and it's not good. It was like good for my soul. It's soul food. The Caribbeans would call it. So, yeah, co-regulation is way deeper and way more traditional, and it's just utterly bankrupt in modernity. Co-regulation has been stripped out systematically, particularly since the Industrial Revolution, particularly since mass migration. And almost no psychologists talk about this, A, because they're all kind of left orientated, but B, because it's against the tenets of modernity. Yeah. So individualism, like the idea of individualizing and professionalizing co-regulation is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Doesn't work. So it's inter-ethnic. I should say ethnic, not ethic. It's inter-ethic as well as inter-ethnic. It's both actually. So this is an example of just someone on the train in Britain playing loud music. It's these little things that are every day, and everyone else is going, "That's not how we do things around here." Yeah, that's the definition of culture, how we do things around here. So shared ethical norms means you're not constantly fighting everyone. You're not, there's an ease for being in a place where people get it. Yeah, that's a felt sense. That's a spiritual thing. It's an embodied thing. It's different level. It's just not being annoyed by the, you know, whatever mouthy migrants on the train or the guy playing music who doesn't get that part of British culture is to be Eritrean. I'm currently in Croatia, and I'm horribly aware that I'm constantly stepping on other people's norms, asking them to use my language. I get it, and I don't think we should demonize people who are migrants. I am myself one temporarily, and it's for reasons I'll come to, like it's less modern. But yeah, I think denying it really doesn't help. Same with eco-regulation. When I'm in the UK, particularly near Wales, which is where my family name is from, it's an Irish name for Welsh, my family name. There's a Hobbiton quality. I'm deeply at ease in the Shire. There's obviously pagans really go into this deeply, but it's you can't. Yes, it's beautiful. I've seen the Himalayas. I've seen the Negev. I've seen, I don't know, the jungles of South America. I've traveled widely, and a lot of these places are beautiful. But the home is the really key thing. Home is a very deep concept. And modern psychology doesn't get this. It's like, why don't you feel at home in an airport in this ghastly strip mall? I was in the United States last year, and a lot of America to me is just like a strip mall. It's just like a parking lot. It's so ugly, most of America. I'm sorry, America, if you're listening, but compared to Italy or Spanish cities or even like a cute village in the Cotswolds. This is the reason Americans go on holiday to these places because they're beautiful. Yeah. Denying domicide. So domicide's the killing of home. Modern psychology and denying domicide is no one's getting better as long as that denial is there. It ignores beauty, right? Beauty is much deeper than people think. That an airport, people, oh, I like an airport because it's exciting. I'm going places. It's like, yeah, but it's ugly, and you're surrounded by strangers and consumer culture. Like an airport is the kind of hell of going somewhere. Which if you've been at home for a long, long time, we all need a little bit of adventure and travel sometimes. Yeah, a little bit of mixing it up. But modernity gets that balance way off, way off, and certainly just doesn't believe in aesthetics. And it's functional. Yeah, Crawley, modern ways of dressing, etc. Some people have made this distinction of somewheres versus nowheres. So this creation kit I talked about was definitely a somewhere, right? People here have a culture, they have a language, they fought for it not long ago. My Ukrainian friends definitely see themselves as somewheres, they resistance to invasion because they think of themselves as a people, they have a language, and you might politically take this side or that, but people are somewheres or a nowhere. So the average BBC presenter, London, a politician in London, they're nowheres. Keir Starmer actually says, I prefer Davos to Westminster because Davos is where the nowheres go. The financial sector in London is not London. It's not UK. They're nowheres. The digital nomad hippie on the beach is a nowhere, right? Like I'm kind of trying to be living as a nowhere in the Balkans. It doesn't really work because I'm not a nowhere at heart. Some people have the soulless nowhere heart, and some of us have the somewhere heart, is what I've discovered. In all my travels, and there's better places to live for certain things. But if you're a somewhere where you've got community, where you've got roots, that's very different than our ruling elite and our media class, who are nearly all nowheres. I forget who made this distinction, but was it David Goodhart? There we go. Yeah, so shared heritage and commitment is just also leads to better behavior. So this is a river of junk that was found in the UK. And you see this sort of junkification of towns where no one cares, right? Where no one has that sense of this is our place. Yeah. I try and do that when I'm abroad. Like I picked up a bit of litter from the beach this morning, and a local kind of nodded to me, like, well done, like you're taking care of our place, and you become part of the R if you do that enough. It's possible. We don't need to be completely black and white about this. It is possible to be a migrant who becomes part of the culture. But ancestry matters. And this sort of digital nomad thing, I've seen it send so many people crazy. They think they're going to paradise, they go to Bali or Thailand or whatever, and then they either don't grow up, they just live in perpetual childhood, or they actually go nuts. It really is not good for people. And I've done it. I've had my time in Portugal and different places. People are, it's like we used to have like gypsies come through my village when I was young, and often they would do crime. And this isn't just prejudice; they would just seem to do more crime. And one of the reasons was they were just less accountable. They felt less bought into the culture, and they were moving on the next day. So this is, in terms of what's sending people insane, certainly it's ethics is linked to this. Yeah. And what you've had from the nowheres and the kind of modern priests is they've said that you don't exist as a people. Like, how many psychologists would actually say, who are your people? They wouldn't have a sense of that. And also you don't exist. Okay. And if you do exist, you're bad. Yeah. Like, if you do exist, you're bad and you should be ashamed of yourself and all your British heritage. And despite all the wonderful things the British have done, I say this as someone with Irish heritage, right? Like, I know some of the bad things, but the British ended slavery. The British had great music. The British food's actually not nearly as bad as people make out. I took my Italian girlfriend, whose family are chefs, literally, took her for a proper British roast, and she loved it. She said, "This is great." So, this is sending people insane. I just do not hear psychologists talk about this. The idea that diversity is good for us is the Tower of Babel, right? The myth that you're surrounded with people who just don't even speak your language. It's rough. I was in the garage the other day, and there's a Filipino migrant working there, nice guy, but he couldn't really communicate with the Croatian, and she was getting more and more stressed, and he was getting stressed. And I just thought, this is no good. You need shared rules. You don't want to be an Indian roundabout. And this is really comes down to people hating what you love and love what you hate, right? So let's be so I love other cultures. No, you don't. You absolutely don't. You don't love female genital mutilation. You don't love child brides. Okay. You don't love many of the things that are normal in other cultures. So you absolutely do not love other cultures. Diversity, by definition, is bad. Why is it bad? Because cultures have a set of values. Other cultures, by definition, have a set of different values. It's not my opinion. That is the definition of culture: is shared norms and values. One definition. So other cultures are bad by your definition of what is good and bad. This is uncomfortable for the modern who says that culture doesn't exist. And any psychologist who isn't deeply aware of this is missing a huge aspect of humanity. It's stressful to be around people who hate what you love and love what you hate. Why have I never heard a psychologist say that? Like, that is not a far right point of view. Okay, that is a very normal point of view. It's stressful to be around people who don't speak your language. You've ever been abroad. I mean, just simple practical things. But also, there's a resonance, there's an embodied cultural piece. Mm. And on the level of values, right? People think, oh, culture's like nice food from abroad. It's like, it's way deeper than that. Piers Morgan wanting his curry. I like curry, but I don't like a lot of things in Pakistani culture. Lived for 2 years in a Pakistani area, and I came in with this like liberal view. I was doing psychology at the time, like, we're all human beings, and I just was like, the looks of hatred and contempt from the local Pakistani community, who are, say, local, the migrant Pakistani community in that area, who are sort of mixed in with a few poor students like me. And I thought, wow, these people hate me. And then I realized why, because I had very different values to them. I understood eventually. And after 2 years of being robbed, spat at, insulted, given dirty looks, I tell you, it's after a while that liberality doesn't really stand up to the study of history or to travel, right? Like, if you really travel, you see like liberals who go to India and bad things happen to them. It's like, it doesn't really stand up to it. And it's not to say you can't like things in other cultures. I love things in Japanese culture. I spent time there, but I'm not Japanese. Okay, so what we're talking about really is co-dysregulation. Whether it be the nice young gentleman you'll see at, what was that, the carnival, Notting Hill Carnival recently. But this is also people who are migrants themselves, so we can have some sympathy. It's not just that I phoned up an NHS doctor the other day because I pay taxes in the UK, and I'm still able to use the NHS. And I phoned up an NHS doctor, which was a miracle to get an appointment, and he just didn't speak that good English. He was from the West Indies and he didn't really understand me. And I thought, this is actually dangerous, and it's not his fault, but it's someone gave him a job who shouldn't have given him a job. You know, and this is Brits abroad as well, dysregulating the locals by acting like idiots. Like, I don't want to say this is one group of people, but co-dysregulation is the thing. Migrant communities, for example, have much higher levels of mental health disorders, even like schizophrenia and stuff. So, like, the guys in the migrant hotels, much higher levels of mental health issues because they're away from their co-regulation. We can have some sympathy for this, but that doesn't mean it's a good thing. Like, if you have, like, I don't know, Germany imports 1 million traumatized Syrians. It's like, well, traumatized people are dysregulated, and dysregulation means they're in more of a fight or flight response. That is a definition of trauma, is being stuck in a fight, flight, or freeze response. One simple definition. And as a result, they're more likely to kick off. They're more likely to see enemies where there aren't any. They're more likely to be anxious and afraid. So again, we can have sympathy, but they're also more likely to be violent. Why? Because they're dysregulated. Their nervous system is wrecked. And you'll see a lot of migrants who do a lot of regulatory behaviors, like alcoholism, for example, or Brits abroad. One is an attempt to regulate. So again, this is complex, right? We don't have to be stupidly simplistic about it. Yeah, and I think one of the things that's going on now in a lot of the Western countries is a sense of violation, which again is a definition. Trauma is one of the definitions of trauma is powerlessness. Is that actually not a definition, but trauma nearly always comes through powerlessness and violation. Okay, so why sexual assault will often create trauma, whereas consensual won't. Yeah, this is why soldiers who are fighting don't often get traumatized, but soldiers in a trench feeling powerless and being shelled will. Seeing someone's friend violated, of course, this kind of thing, right? So now what we've got is a feeling of national violation in the UK and many other Western countries, France, Germany, Holland, as a result of, for example, the gangs in the UK. I can't go into it on YouTube, but just horrific things. And there's a way in which people that still have a tribal identity, which working class people do, despite the middle class nowheres telling them they shouldn't, feel personally violated by this. And if you are being replaced, like Mohammed and Olivia, interestingly, but Mohammed is the top boy's name for babies being born in the UK. Now you could say, hey, it's not replacement, it's not a conspiracy, and it's like, well, whether it's a conspiracy or not, it is a non-consensual movement of people into an area. I don't know what you'd call that. I might get in trouble if I call it an invasion, but it's what else would you call it? Yeah, and people feel violated. So if we're going to talk about psychology, just from the point of view of the individual, we're going to miss the violation that happens on the group level. So very important. And I think everyone in the West is affected by this, whether they admit this or not right now. It's only just starting to happen here in Croatia. There's like a new wave of migrants, and they're quite chill, gentle migrants from the Philippines who are Catholic as well, and Nepalese who aren't Catholic but seem to be quite nice. And it's just beginning to happen here. Yeah, I saw this woman in the garage getting frustrated, and I thought, yeah, welcome to the EU's going to force it on them, and it is being forced on countries, and places like Hungary and Poland that are resisting it are literally fined every day. I don't see psychologists talk about this. Of course, this leads to kind of increased breakdown of a culture, leads to increased tyranny as a result. And actually, by the way, it's not 3,000. This data is old. The latest data I've seen is actually 12,000 in the UK. That's the last. This is a year old, that data. Just after I'd done these slides, saw some other data. And this is a thing, people I know from YouTube, for example, have been arrested, and there's something called Section 6 in the UK where people can be arrested under anti-terrorism laws. They have a computer taken away. You don't have a right to remain silent. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And there's a reason everyone's following Black Belt Barrister in England right now who's anywhere near conservative, because everyone's running scared. All my friends self-censor. I've censored myself several times. Frankly, I was nervous when I went through Heathrow last time. I've never done anything that would traditionally be called illegal. I've certainly never encouraged violence. I do not encourage violence. I'm not encouraging any kind of hatred. I am saying, though, let's look at the facts here. Let's look at the actual psychology of people. And if you deny that, then you have to become tyrannical. Governments have to become tyrannical because people increasingly are like, hang on a minute, they want to do something about it. And a culture self-regulates. Like a culture regulates, right? It's like the co-self-regulation of a culture. And once you don't have a cultural coherence, that breaks down. So you need the regulation enforced, essentially. Yeah. Why has this happened? Money is a big one. Like if you look at, like, I don't know, these Filipino NHS nurses, I had a very nice experience with Filipino nurses in the NHS once. Very lovely. They were holding my hand, but they were still speaking in a language I didn't understand while the operation was happening. I had to be sort of semi-conscious for a pretty unpleasant operation, and I was like, God, I wish they were speaking English. They were lovely people. Don't get me wrong. We don't need to demonize anyone, but the reason they're there is also economic, right? They're just cheaper to get, and you don't have to train them in the UK if the Philippines train them. So you outsource the training, and people say, "Oh, the NHS would collapse. The National Health Service would collapse without migrant workers." And I'm like, "Yeah, because we don't pay people enough, right?" So it keeps wages down. There was a study done by Whole Foods, actually, owned by Amazon, that said that people unionize less when they're multicultural. So there's very clear supply and demand thing though with the wage market, which is why working class people are often quite anti mass migration. And another one is just the trauma from two world wars. People are hyper vigilant. The idea of any kind of ethno-nationalism is the ultimate evil. And almost no psychologists will talk about this. Like, I don't think I've ever heard Peterson really talk about it, for example. Like any sense of the psychology of tribe, the psychology of people. Hypervigilance means you become overly scared of something due to trauma. Yeah, so you saw me earlier, the firework went off and I kind of flinched and I was a bit anxious for a minute. It's mild hypervigilance I've got from various places I've been. But mine's pretty mild, whereas I think culturally we've got this huge hypervigilance to ethnic nationalism, to tribe, to we call it extended family, if that makes you more comfortable. Yeah, the World War One and World War Two set up. We could say maybe there's a conspiracy involved there. I'll let you tell me in the chat who you think that is, what's going on. But now conspiracy just means any explanation which is given against this monocultural regime, which says that this doesn't happen and this doesn't happen and all of these things, just denial of these things. So it's interesting, it's an interesting cult. So any dogma of the cult which people disagree with is a conspiracy theory. That's the framing, right? It's you're weird and strange. It's not just you disagree. It's not you're questioning some of the core dogmas of this cult modernity, but you are bad and wrong and weird to be doing it. I remember Kamala was saying, he's weird. JD Vance is weird. They kept trying to use that word. Yeah. So is there a conspiracy? Maybe, right? I don't know, but certainly it is the case that psychology as a field has completely ignored this critical area of being human. It wants individual consumers, right? Look at corporate culture, it's always super multicultural. Every advert on British TV has these weird it's always a black dude and a white woman. All across the West, actually, it's just relentless media assault. And films do it, and films do badly. No one even wants it. The people aren't going to the box office to watch this nonsense. I was sitting in the cinema with a friend, and I was watching the adverts, the commercials before the film came on. I said to my friend, I said, let's see if there's one advert that just has white British people in it, right? And my friend's actually mixed race, so he's laughing. He knows it's not personal. And and there wasn't. It was like 20 different commercials, and not one of them, which statistically is ridiculous. If you think some adverts just have one or two people in, and the British population is still 80% native, I think, at this point, though it won't be that way for long with the birth rates and the migration. That's not statistically likely. So there's a relentless media push, and certainly the individual consumer that has no ties to land can just be moved around between factories and jobs. The individual consumer who can just be manipulated and doesn't have other allegiances. This is where it's almost a left-wing analysis, actually, is the breaking of all allegiances other than to money. So that's the only thing that matters. All allegiances that say, no, this is my church, it's more important than money. This is my community, so I'm not going to move away from here. That's more important than money. This is my family, extended family. None of that matters. But think about the average ruling class person in Britain. They'd go away to university, live like I did, live in another community. Maybe they work abroad like I have. And it gradually smashes all of that. Now, again, there's still a lot of people that doesn't apply to, particularly the working class, who tend to be more local. And the contempt for the working class you'll see from most psychologists who really do not get them and insult them. And I've made that mistake. I've been conditioned that way too. When I was studying psychology, I'd really looked down on a lot of working class culture. And you'll see a lot of the influencers on YouTube from the UK, sort of posh, right? The unheard crowd. They're kind of posh. Yeah. Okay, so hypology is complicit. And you can think of liberalism, modernity, and the lead edge of that is the far left, right? So that's the most liberal of the liberal, right? So we're living in liberalism, and obviously today's conservatives would still be like yesterday's liberals because it's always moving in this liberal direction. But there's a 17-to-1 ratio in psychology from the States. This is, I couldn't get a figure from the UK. This is the latest stats I've seen of left leaning to right leaning. Yeah. So there's not many psychologists. I sometimes joke there's like 5 of us, like 2 or 3 of them I can text on a daily basis. And very few of us even dare talk about some of these topics. And certainly if I was at university, there's no way I could talk about these topics. There's certain research topics that are just this is the question that blows people's mind. Sometimes I'll ask other people this. I'll say, what's too little racism? And they'll say, what do you mean? It's the ultimate evil. And I'll say, well, is it? Because surely is there no Aristotelian mean? Is there no way that, I don't know, like some of my friends might banter to each other and no one's getting hurt and it's actually a bonding mechanism, like the US military is big on that. Does it become an evil in and of itself if we try and make this witch hunt to stamp out even unconscious bias? So again, this is a question that reveals a taboo, right? And psychologists cannot talk about this stuff. They absolutely cannot. The other thing that's interesting is psychology didn't even exist before secular individualism. So back in the day, a lot of these questions will be addressed by religion, by mythology, what else? Cultural traditions. People would use music and dance and different things tribally, like the Greeks, like psyche meant mind and soul. Yeah. So yes, psychology as a field is new because it only really pops up when you have hyper-individualism. Otherwise, you'd be better off, and the priest would do confession, which has parallels to modern psychology. But a lot of it was done by ritual healing. I've seen this in Africa, like healing rituals, community support. We can't even imagine what we've lost, actually. I've seen sent bits of it when I've lived in very poor communities in the favela slums of Brazil, or when I've been around tribal people in Africa. You'll see bits of it, but we can't even imagine what we've lost. Psychology only exists because of modernity. What are the sins of modernity? Well, this is one of the sins, right? Like the stuff around race and ethnicity. Like you see this with Piers Morgan, who's very much a creature of modernity. This was, I think, last year's most interesting interview, whether you love or hate them both or one or the other. Nick Fuentes, Piers Morgan says you're a racist, and Nick Fuentes sort of doesn't deny it, just kind of laughs, and he's committing a sin in terms of modernity, particularly post World War II modernity. And you see the various kind of clashes, and he says, "And you're not getting laid. You should get laid," because he's a Catholic and he's quite strict Catholic, and he's not had sex before marriage. And he's teasing him, and Nick Fuentes is like, "Why are you teasing me for this? It's not a flex to have been promiscuous, peers and all his affairs and all the rest of it." So it's funny because like he's trying to say you've committed a sin against racism and a sin against hedonism. And Nick Fuentes, again, love him or hate him, don't agree with everything he says, basically just says, well, to me, these aren't sins. We've got different religions. And literally, yeah. Obviously, I'm not being subscribed to this channel. If you watch this far, then subscribe. That would be a sin. Okay, subscribe. Okay, so why is materialist one psychology insufficient? Well, it denies goodness. It denies that virtue is a thing. It denies beauty. Ultimately, it denies truth. I'm going to come to that. And it denies tribe. I've spent quite a lot of time on that. So it's an insufficient anthropology. It doesn't understand. Like this is the essence of being human, right? What do I find beautiful? What do I love? Who do I belong to? Right? I belong to someone. I belong to a group. What is goodness? Am I a good person or not? Like I lose sleep over that. I'm not always perfect, right? I'm far from perfect, actually. Sometimes I'm like, this is what I worry about, right? I want to live in beautiful places. Truth matters to me because it fucking does. Not no, I'm not going to be bullied into saying things that aren't true. So psychology doesn't understand these things, and as a result, it's shitty and doesn't work, despite its lie, the lie of progress. Right? So this is this kind of post-Christian lie. Everything's getting better and better technologically, which has stopped being true. I would say in many ways. How much better is my latest iPhone than one 10 years ago? We're not. The Jetsons isn't happening. My robot butler, you know, maybe Elon will make a few for the super rich, but I don't think I'm getting one anytime soon. And if I do, it'll probably be a nightmare and it will, babysit my kids and turn them into autists. I don't know. I don't think the technological dream is turning into a bit of a nightmare for most people. I do not want a sex robot. I do not want my children eating junk food, all the tech stuff. Yeah, and the other one is that we're just getting more and more diverse, more and more open, better and better and better. Where does this come from? Modernity is assault on the body, even. You know what? Let's talk about the World War II consensus first. Okay, where does this come from? Actually, is the idea of modernity and liberalism just constantly destroying boundaries. Dugin, who I have mixed relationship with because his stance on Ukraine, but he's a very interesting philosopher in this way. Mary Harrington, good British thinker, really smart lady, like razor sharp. Talk about this is the last stage in modernity's logic. Is there's less and less borders, less and less boundaries, more and more stuff gets added to the sacred flag, which is the non-reproductive flag. Remember, this is the flag of the non-reproductive, particularly the non-native reproductive. And we're breaking down the community. Then we even get to the body. We say, you're not even your body. You get to self-identify. This is why trans is one of the sacred groups. Now, if you remember a few years ago, trans was suddenly in all the newspapers and it's pushed everywhere. I was like, why is this being pushed so hard? I mean, it's a small group of maybe unfortunate, maybe unwell people. We can be kind to them, but why? This is not. This is a fringe thing. Like I've met trans people. I lived with one briefly, actually. He seemed quite unwell, if I'm honest. But it's why is this in the news so much? Why is this being pushed and then eventually pushed on the kids? And people went, hang on a minute. Yeah, this logic of not even the body matters. You are just who you think you are. The mind, the Descartesian, Descartes was definitely one of the main philosophers of modernity. And this idea that what really matters is the mind inside the body. So we can cut bits off, we can upload ourselves to the cloud, we can be transhuman in the wider sense. That's the end game, really, here. So key item of faith of modernity is there's no limits. Yeah. Anyone remember that song? In the chat if you do. Okay, so the key item of faith is that there's absolutely, you should have no, I can do what I want to do when I want to do it. Back to that devil worshipping thing, satanic thing. This is very bizarre, actually, because if you think of the human body, like your skin is a limit. It mostly keeps stuff out, and a little bit of, there's holes to let stuff in, like your ears and your mouth, whatever. A cell is mostly keeping stuff out, and a little bit of letting stuff in, right? The managed border. This colored one you can see bottom left is wolf territories. So, in nature, we naturally have borders. Wolves keep to their own territory. They don't go in other wolves' territory. Like, territory is a thing. That's the nation of 7 groups of wolves, 7 families of wolves. So it's, yes, they might occasionally cross over, or they might interbreed a little bit, but, we've intermarry like we do sometimes. My girlfriend's Italian, but basically keep it to your own. Like, that is the natural thing. Borders are completely normal. This is like, it's not just that you get married and that's a good thing and you make a border, right? It's also rules. Like, you can't play a game of football without rules. Jonathan Peugeot is much better than me on this kind of stuff, but just you need rules to play a game. There's no game without the rules. There's no sanity without them. So this is why Trump's wall was such a symbolic thing. It was pushing back against that element of borders are normal and healthy. And there is pushback. I said young men would be the first to push back because they're particularly young native men have been discriminated against so heavily, demonized so heavily. But now the women are following. So Louise Perry, she's so smart. Love her. Do you have a bit of a cognitive crush on Louise? Yes, Ms. Perry, to be respectful, deserves all the respect out there. She's brilliant. Me and my girlfriend absolutely love her book on the sexual revolution. And there's younger influencers now. Like this Freya India, I've heard a couple of, I don't know her well, but a couple of times I've heard her. She seemed like, again, this pushback and saying, hey, we need some borders. I heard Freya saying that everyone's obsessed with boundaries because society doesn't give them to you. Like, imagine like you go on a date and you've got to completely reinvent the wheel. You've got to work out, should you be polyamorous? What do you do on a first date? What do you do on a second date? Is this okay? Is that okay? It's just too much. It's just too much for people. So I think people like the women who have traditionally been sort of the vanguard of this late modernity, the people who are really leading the charge, are now also waking up to, which to me shows, because women basically follow the cultural trend. Young men lead it, they get demonized for it, but when there's a certain critical mass, women are actually very sensitive to this. They go, oh, the tribe is pulling in a different direction. So now there's no black pill here. Like, I've got loads of hope that now I saw first the older educated women, no offense, Louise, and then now the young women. I'm like, okay, we're good. There's a pushback happening. Yeah. So one way to look at traditional culture and religion is a set of limits that supports human flourishing. Counterculture now is, ironically, family, faith, embodiment, land, these things that I've talked about. Yeah, that is going against the culture of modernity. It's funny because modernity still thinks it's edgy, right? It still thinks that taking the piss out of Christianity is edgy. Like this hotel I was in had all these like punk things with like devil symbols, and it's not edgy. It's just sad. It's just the utterly mainstream at this point for a pop star to be putting on red horns or something, taking the piss out of Jesus. It's just so dull and conformist. It's just utterly conforming. Mm. So we've got this weird rebellion back to tradition happening as people realize that limits are good. Yeah, and also people notice, right? This is data on this, and bear in mind how biased liberal psychology is, and how left leaning it is. That I can't believe this data has even been found. They're even allowed to do the research, but religious people are happier, less addictive. They even have better sex and more of it. Right? True fact. So in some ways, all we have to do, if you're kind of with me on this sort of being a little bit more faith based, but less modern, is just wait. Generation, this is all gone. Like a generation or two, it's died out. So yeah, that's the good news. Again, another white pill. Yeah. Okay, a lot of this, as I said, relates to World War II, particularly since then, modernity took this extreme turn. Basically, the Nazis were considered too masculine, too boundary, too bordered, too ethnic, all these things. And of course, Hitler, not a very nice man. Don't agree with almost anything he said, I don't think. But he was made into Satan. Yeah, and Peugeot points out he's not Satan. I don't know. He loved his dog. I also love Alsatians. There's one thing we do agree on. And the demonizing of a human being is missing the point because it's not the ultimate evil. Yeah. And what this did is demonize borders, boundaries, and masculinity. And then gradually that there was less and less and less. So why did the Germans let everyone into their country? World War II guilt. And all of the post-colonial countries have had that pushed on them. You should be guilty about your colonial past. Therefore, you should let everyone in. Like when I talk to people about mass migration in the UK, if they're liberal, they'll be like, yeah, but what about the British Empire? I'm like, well, okay, first of all, not as bad as you think. Secondly, if even if it was, two wrongs don't make a right, do they? So the less and less boundaries that we'll see happening more and more on the flag every year. People talk about the feminization of culture generally, which is about yes rather than no. If we put it in Asian terms, it's yin, not yang. Yeah, the more yinning of culture. This creates this leftwards drift. So there's this fun cartoon where World War II soldiers say, we want to fight Nazis, but then their views are considered Nazi in inverted commas by modern progressives because culture, as Mencius Mollberg has said, Yarvin, this culture always swims left. But I'd say until a few years ago, we might have just changed that. Yeah, but certainly, like your granddad would be considered like super reactionary compared to your dad and compared to you, in nearly every case. Okay, and this leads to the ridiculous situation where, the gym is far right and families are far right. This article in the Guardian about the gym could turn you far right. I mean, I've just heard all sorts of silly things, and eventually, it's any kind of masculinity, any kind of borders, any kind of boundaries. And there was this song done by Frisbee about this. We're all far right now, saying this is completely ridiculous that views that were normal till about 10 minutes ago are far right. Why far right? Because that just means evil, because there's no border to restrict what can be called far right. It's just a way of saying bad, like racist, far right, Nazi. These are the magic spell words, and these magic spell words have basically stopped working. This is the year we're going to see that they've stopped working. So this left drift is now up for debate for the first time because this magic trick that's been pulled of just defining anything that's not super, super modern, i.e. super, super liberal, as evil. I think that's come to an end now, which is fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Why does this matter in psychology? So there are exceptions. Hartz, for example, was a psychologist in the States who's kind of made an organization for at least sort of more diverse, politically diverse groups. Not really very right wing, I don't think, but certainly more open. Is open. I think it's called Open Psychological Society. Adam Lane Smith, just to give one example, someone I had on my podcast I like a lot. He's a bit more conservative in some of his views on attachment theory. Does really good work, and he's not very explicitly right leaning, but you can hear there's traditionalism in his worldview. Good guy as well, nice guy. So there are exceptions, but the vast majority of psychologists are liberal leanings, and this means there's certain topics that are just off the table. You can't research IQ around tribe. You can't research around like the code dysregulation is very, very difficult to do. Has this very feminine tone, and often the sort of explanatory theory is victimhood. So it's overly yin means that nothing's your fault, not taking responsibility. Again, not everyone, but this is definitely the norm now in psychology. Like I've seen this stuff on Instagram yesterday about ADHD. Like it's nothing's your fault. You deserve. Everyone should bend over backwards to accommodate you. Um, yeah, very unhelpful psychologically, I'd say. So more and more free, more and more open, more and more self-orientated. So it's more yin, but also more and more self-orientated. This is just unhealthy. It's just unhealthy. So psychology is trapped in an unhealthy paradigm that is pushing an unhealthy worldview. So to be more and more free, to be more and more open, to be more and more self-obsessed will drive you crazy. What point does that become pathology? I mean, this is what I'd ask you. Does it really look healthy when you see like the average like Californian liberal or New York coach or therapist? They don't look healthy. They don't, even their voice, it sounds emasculine if they're a man. If they're a woman, it sounds angry and screechy. Yeah, or they do this like weird pecking gestures and like their whole body language just looks super unhealthy. Also, you can look up the data. Like it's a bit hidden because of the bias, but you'll see who are the most mad groups: liberal young American women, people who are right on the front edge of this. Who are the most mad groups in human history? Over 50% medicated. Like, look up. This is correlation, of course. So you could say, oh, it's not causation. I've even heard liberals say the reason we're all crazy is because we care so much because we're such good people. It's like, who are you fucking kidding? You're following a worldview which is sick and is making you sick. And I think we're seeing that now. I think young people are seeing it increasingly. And there's real dangers of misuse of psychology. You know, the Tavistock Clinic in the UK was really taken down for transing loads of kids and really giving very, very bad advice and just harming, like, just, I think it was thousands of children. American Psychological Society did a bunch of like anti-masculine stuff on toxic masculinity. And we've got to be really careful here. So, for example, in the Soviet system, psychologists would imprison political dissidents who didn't like the Soviet system, label them as mentally ill, and then they can be electrocuted, they can be drugged, they can be indefinitely kept in prison, in hospital. Prison disguised as hospital. So this is a really severe thing. We should be very, very careful. These priests of modernity, I think, are going to kick back. I think we're going to see a bit of a best case scenario, actually, is we see a civil war in psychology where sort of sane psychologists, like some of these guys I mentioned, kick back. But, you know, the numbers are so low in the trauma world. And, you know, I'll be on a trauma conference with 100 people and I'll be the only one giving a conservative point of view. Right. And I'm discouraged by the organizers from doing that. So it's like you can see them trying to shut me down, saying, Mark, don't say that. That will upset people. And I'm like, no, I'm going to speak the truth. Like, this is at least half the truth you're missing. Like, psychology, if it's missing half the truth, because the thing about left and right, there's different ways to think about left and right? And then, again, left is just the lead edge of modernity, modern right is still modern. But it's kind of far left versus left, really. But they're explanatory. So, what causes behavior? So, if someone's, I don't know, unhappy, anxious, whatever, what causes that? And the left is always going to say, well, it's deterministic, it's the conditions. You know, Marx was very deterministic, with psychology coming out of that, it's very deterministic. It's all just you're a victim of the culture, you're a victim of the system, it's money. And they're not totally wrong. Like, those things matter, you know, things like the financial situation of someone matters, right? Um, but a more right-leaning psychologist is going to have the explanation of choice, of faith. It's going to say, well, you're cut off from God if they're really traditionalist, or if they're more moderate, right? They might say, well, you need to take personal responsibility. That was Peterson's thing, right? Like it's still very individualistic. He wasn't talking about tribe, but at least he was saying you're not a victim. And that was hugely popular because people understood that's at least half the explanatory value of why anyone does anything. So if you want to cure anything, you need to have a sufficient and full explanatory power. It's like Ken Wilber, the philosopher's definitions of left and right. I don't think they're complete, but it's interesting. And it shows why psychology that only looks at half the picture is going to be at least half wrong. But as I said, I think it's even more than that because of this push of culture over time. And it's really open to abuse, as we saw with the mistreatment, the mutilation of children that's been going on. And there's a study going on in the UK now which continues this. We absolutely cannot let ideologically possessed, potentially satanically possessed psychologists make decisions about children's well-being. There needs to be a stand against this. Okay, so let's talk about late modernity. So I've alluded to this all the way through. You guys still with me, by the way? Time to take a breath. I'm getting hungry, but let's keep going. Let's keep going. Yeah, this has taken me like years to think of this. Years and years and years went into this. So hopefully it's not a confused mess. I spent a few days trying to get it together. This is one of the things recently I've come across Tom Holland. He's also been on trigonometry and loads of other podcasts. Good comedian. Comedian, good historian. Yeah, and he suggests that a lot of our sort of psychological substructure is Christian. Yeah, so a lot of what you're seeing in late modernity is actually Christian. And Peugeot also points a lot of this stuff out. Love Peugeot. This whole talk is indebted to him. So sending love. This is the worship of the fringe or the hyper Christian. Yeah. So Jesus said, don't throw the first stone at the adulterer. It's okay if you talk to the tax collector or I don't know, other kinds of Jews, what are they called? Samaritans. And people have extended this into an obsession with the other. So a worshipping of the other. So this is my friend Alex's Trauma Super Conference. Quick plug for Alex. Very good conference. I've spoken at it a number of times. But you'll see he's basically, as far as I can tell, I can't speak for him, but look at the amount of other on there. That is not statistically likely. And his conference, by the way, I'm actually sharing it because I like it. There's far worse conferences that I don't want to advertise. Like I've seen panels and it's like expert white guy, expert white guy, and random young girl who's there because she's black. Yeah, because she has to be, because otherwise people demand it. And like, I've been given crap for like just having a meritocracy for people, and the obsession with otherness doesn't make psychology work. And this is a misreading of Jesus saying, "Hey, maybe don't kill the adulterer. Maybe chill out a bit with that. Maybe it's okay if if we're all sinful, we're all unusual in our own way." But he was, as far as I can tell, going against the sort of Pharisaic, overly rigid culture that you'll still see in Orthodox Jews today. All right, so he's saying just chill out a little bit with that. And what has happened is we've taken that and run with it. And in late modernity, that's ended up in these kind of pseudo religions like woke, which are Christian in essence, but they don't have the heart of Christianity. They're hyper Christian in a way which is super unhealthy. Um, Secularism, liberalism generally could be considered as a distortion of Christian values. So, for example, people say, "Oh, I'm not Christian." It's like, well, do you believe in human rights? Human rights is Holland stuff, not Spider-Man, Tom Holland, the other one. He talks about like, human rights is just a basic Christian idea, the dignity of man. This is a Christian idea. You didn't get that with the Romans. You don't get that today in many parts of the world. Yeah, this idea of respect for other people, the universality. Like I can be in the Universal Catholic Church here in Croatia. Let's say no fireworks again. I can be in the Universal Church here in Croatia, and I'll be treated as a fellow Catholic, fellow human being. Yeah, that's why Christians eventually ended slavery. Like when they kind of went, hang on a minute, everyone's my fellow man, we're all universal. But when that gets taken to no borders, mass migration, etc., that's a distortion of that. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say psychologists need to make normal okay again. It's okay to be white, it's okay to be a man, it's okay to be straight. Why? Because that's a normal psychology. It should be based around most people. It's okay to be normal. It's okay to be the average. It's okay to be the norm. And I think psychology that's obsessed with difference and actually pathologizes, white straight man, whoever, any kind of norm, sees them as oppressive, and that's their main sort of Marxist worldview. Marxism, another distortion of Christianity, by the way. Again, the you should feed the poor becomes there should definitely be no one richer than you. But yeah, psychology needs to be normal again. It needs to look at things primarily through this lens and not be obsessed with the exception. Yeah. And this is like deeply blasphemous to modern psychology and modern individuality. This is the bit that will get me cancelled, actually. If the psychologists see this, it has to orientate to the healthy norm as the main thing. And it's not to say we need to be hateful or mean. I'm not suggesting anyone persecute anyone. But this needs to be the normal orientation. So blasphemy. All right. Yeah. So this framing, this Marxist sort of pseudo-Christian framing, like as long as psychologists are obsessed with intersectionality, we're all playing victim. Who chooses the sections? How do you weight them in terms of which is most important? Is no one's answering these questions. It's impossible, right? So essentially, any social justice is unjust because it orientates the group and not the individual, which means you're being rewarded or punished based on things you didn't do. In war crimes, it's called group punishment, okay, or the opposite, group positive discrimination. So this leads to a sense of injustice in people, which people morally do not like. That's in our DNA. Even monkeys have it. We do not like the injustice. And it purports to be about justice, but it is the opposite. It's also a very unhealthy psychological frame. So modern psychology, when its liberal framing says, yes, 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 we should always look at things as oppressed versus oppressor. That is not a healthy frame for looking at men and women. My relationship with my girlfriend, mum, sister, niece, this is not a relationship of oppressor and oppressed. Okay, I'm pretty sure all four of those women, probably there's four of the main women in my life. I don't know, my colleague Helen, there's a fifth, would agree. These are not oppressive relationships. Now, does that ever happen? Yes, particularly in non-Western, non-Christian cultures. Go to Africa, go to Muslim countries. But we are living in countries that are some of the least oppressive ever because of this Christian heritage. So, seeing this as a basic frame of reality is deeply oppositional, deeply unhealthy. Turns men and women against each other, turns everyone against each other. And I can think of no worse thing for your psychology well than this. This is really up there. So yeah, terrible psychological framing. Psychologists who buy into this, I think, are really creating a huge problem. Um, Psychology is obsessed with victimhood. And again, coming from the Christian tradition, Jesus was the martyr as victor. You'll see like the Gabor Mates of the world, nothing's ever your fault. It's all a trauma. Again, my friend Alex, again, a guy, he wrote a book called It's Not Your Fault. And I joked, so he actually says what I say, which is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. That second part's really important. But I tease him for making this book because that is the message of liberal psychology is you are not to blame for anything. And you'll see this with young people with ADHD, autism. They're just absolutely obsessed with this. Nothing's ever their fault. It's always their condition. Jonathan Haidt's written about this, so I think it's very centrist. Yeah, and again, this comes from misunderstanding the Christian tradition and extending that into anything. It's basically disempowering. It's disempowering to think of oneself as a victim. If I do trauma work, for example, this is absolutely essential. Yes, we can say, yes, there was a violation. This person did something bad to you. There was an aggressor or whatever. That's important at a particular stage. But ultimately, they have to get to a point of not playing the victim forever, because even if they were a victim of, say, crime that they in no way initiated, victimhood is just not a healthy psychological frame. It's completely disturbing. People think what we need for psychological well-being is like more love, right? We need to be loved more. We need to be listened to. We need to have our feelings validated. Not true at all. Particularly for men, we need more power. Yeah, we need a feeling of empowerment. We need a feeling of competence. We need a feeling of, you know what, I don't need to be running around scared of the world because I can handle it. One of my main mentors, Paul Linden, works with martial arts and he takes abused kids and does martial arts with them. And then they get out of that victim state that I can look after myself now. It's a beautiful thing to see. There's a look of empowerment that comes with people when they realize they don't have to be victims again. That's truly healing, not just being nice to them. And, there's a time and a place for empathy and being nice, but it's not ultimately what heals trauma. Yeah, so psychology has become obsessed with feelings. This is if you think of modernity as increasingly going into the individual self, you can look up Century of the Self, becoming increasingly interested in the subjective self. So late modernity, particularly, goes from the obsession with what can be measured and objective to what is felt. So this is a modern versus postmodern. You'll hear this kind of civil war going on. Facts don't care about your feelings. That's modern versus postmodern. And a lot of American culture, which is highly influenced by confessional psychology, that to talk about things gets them off your chest. You don't want to repress anything. Repression is bad. You go crazy if you repress things, as if you should act out all your desires. No, not healthy. And that America's a very expressive culture. I know I've got a lot of listeners in the States. I do love a lot of things about the States, but it's much more expressive than almost any other culture. I think actually, yeah, any other culture I've been to in the world. And I've been to like 50 countries. So it's very expressive, very confessional. It comes from the history of America. And what it's led to is this therapeutic fragility. So I've had conversations with colleagues, students, and that they were demanding from me a level of kind of a way of interacting that would be appropriate in therapy with a child, but not between adults. And lots of people have commented on this, the sort of snowflake generation. I mean, it can be overstated. Particularly if like young people just don't have any money or whatever, they're in some actual bad conditions. Let's not just blame them for everything. But there is a degree of fragility, like young men who can't ask a girl out on a date, people that need to take 2 weeks off work because someone raised their voice to them. There's a level of fragility which is just bonkers. And I think it comes from this obsession with feeling. And what I've learned over the years is that, for example, I coached someone today. When I was coaching them, all my attention was on them, and it cheered me up. It just makes you feel better when you go to service, you put your attention on other people. You go, what can I give here? That sort of bouncing around your own head is just not helpful, particularly if it's done on social media without real supervision. One of the psychologists I mentioned earlier points this out that when you do psychology at university, I remember this, they warn you if you do abnormal psychology, right? They say, look, don't diagnose yourself with everything. Medical students do it, psychology students do it. And that's what's going on now because they don't have the psychologists there. Like we had the tutors saying, no, Mark, you don't have this disorder. Shut up, get on with your work. You just think you do. So this is where we're at now. And there's a level of fragility that comes through saying, what's important is I'm not offended that my feelings aren't hurt, not that I learn robustness to the fact that people have different opinions. Universities have been totally complicit in this. I think psychology is completely complicit in this. We do need to tell our patients and students to man up and grow up a lot more. Ultimately, where modernism also ends up is relativism. So the good, the true, and the beautiful, the Greek distinctions get thrown out the window. So there's no goodness. So we all go crazy because we have to decide what to do. We have to have values. There's no beauty. We all go crazy because then everything gets ugly. But the ultimate one here is there's no truth. The postmodern obvious contradiction. There is no truth as a truth, right? So it's an obvious contradiction. But if you keep saying, hey, everything's about feelings, everything's about opinion, then you actually get rid of the notion that there is truth. So there's no moral objectivity, but then eventually there's no even, hey, everything, that's just your opinion, man. That's my opinion. It's my truth, people say. And this sends everyone fucking nuts. Why does everyone go nuts? Because you have to operate in the world as if there was truth. You like what would that even mean? Like, am I a cabbage? Am I sitting on a banana right now? Hopefully not. Interesting example, Mark. Okay, moving on. Anyway, so we can't operate in the world as if there was no truth. So it just makes people crazy trying. Yeah, so eventually it's this sort of post-World War II idea that any boundaries of fascism and essentially truth is a boundary. This is not the case. Yeah. A lot of the time I hear psychologists say, well, that's just your opinion. Like, no, 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 it's true. It's true. Unsustainable, totally unsustainable. Yeah. Um, you might say, okay, Mark, you're just taking a side in the culture war, right? This online polarity. Somebody accused me of being divisive saying this the other day. And well, yeah, left is the lead edge of modernity culturally. That's sort of hyper modern, if you will. But there's other aspects to it. It's not as simple as that. Like a lot of sort of Thatcherite, Reaganite economics is super modern. Okay, remember, fascism and communism and liberalism are all modern from this point of view. So if you're seeing it like Democrats, Republican, there's an aspect of that because uh, some of the aspects of objectification may be worse from the right, and some of the aspects of this kind of over subjectification may be worse from the left, and the intersubjective is missed by both. But like that's just one lead edge. It's actually way deeper than that. Now, I said it's a death cult. I know it's a long video. Well done for sticking with us. Drop us a like if you have. I appreciate it. I reckon like 10 people will watch this video. My long videos that take me my whole life to work. No one watches. So drop us a like if you're one of the 10. Is it difficult? Yes, because we're dying out. Like the population's going down as a direct result of these things. Now, there's other factors in that, the hormones in the water, there's all sorts of factors, but a big one is just modernity. Like the more modern somewhere is, the more the population goes down, and migrants who come from non-modern places have higher birth rates. That's why the capitalist class want the migrants here to keep the system going, to keep the stop wages going down like they did after the Black Death. But eventually, after a generation or two, they also become modern. Yeah, so there's no getting out of this, and that's death. Also, in terms of modernity, leads to particularly how the sort of fumes of Christianity die out. You'll hear that life is no longer sacred because we're all just stuff. That modern idea, remember, we're all just material. People aren't sacred. Life isn't sacred. So of course we can have euthanasia. The awful stories coming out of Canada in regard to this, various European countries now. And of course, child sacrifice will become a thing. What are we sacrificing to? Well, the gods of modernity. Peugeot's good on this, but what is convenience? It's pleasure, it's hedonism, it's my own girl boss career. Millions of children, yeah, like a Holocaust every year. I think it's something like 500,000 a year in the US and 250,000 a year in the UK. Just millions around the world. We're looking at millions of babies are being killed as a result of modernity saying the most important thing is your freedom and your choice. Your choice, right? It's pro-life. It's my not pro-life, it's pro-choice. It's my choice and my freedom and essentially just my convenience. All right. Now I've got a strong stance on this. And I think if you don't worship choice, then it's very obvious. It's very obvious. no one would recommend it. So is it a death cult? Yeah, from the babies to the population to the old people to the way we treat animals and farming on all these things. So yes, it fucking is. So when I say death cult, this isn't just hyperbole for the clicks. This is genuinely what's going on. As I said, the fumes of Christianity are running out. Remember, before Christianity, they could tell when a Roman site was pre-Christian because there'd be dead babies everywhere, right? Because life wasn't sacred. The idea of infanticide, euthanasia, or just the killing of people, like war crimes on a scale that we couldn't imagine. So we started to see this in terms of World War II. The fumes of Christianity are almost done now. So what's happening is modernity showing its true colors, which are its without respect for life, which is the material view of the world. And this will be horrific in a way that you can't imagine unless you've spent time in, I don't know, Afghanistan, Sierra Leone, some of the places I've spent time. Horrific things, horrific things. So I think we are at a tipping point. We are at this point where bad things happen, people then act bad. It makes bad things happen, it makes people act worse. This is the cycle of crazy that we're getting to. And the last third now, oh my God. So what do we do about it? You might be saying, like, hey, Mark, great diagnosis, great history lesson, great analysis, use some long words. Well done, English boy. So what do we do about it? Well, the first thing I'd say is we've covered the mess we're in, we covered how we got here. Now we look at how to fix it. And there's a sort of bold, bold thing, Connor, and let's see if it plays off. I want to have some humility here. I think it's very difficult as someone raised in modernity to say, I've got the answer. That would be um, arrogant in a way that actually exemplifies the arrogance of modernity. Modernity is, I am the boss, me, I know best, I don't need to be told what to do. And I don't want to embody that ironically, in my answer to this. So some humility is needed here. But I think there are people that I mentioned sort of pointing in the right direction, like Zachary, I mentioned, and Peugeot. Um, Here's where it starts with, I'd say, like, if we're going to find our answer to this, I think it's we, not you or I, but we, is there more than modernity offers? Is that your instinct? Like goodness is real, like all the dead babies, whatever it is, that's wrong, objectively wrong. Like, is your moral intuition that there's something more? And like sometimes it's just like, my girlfriend's had an awesome career in the NGO world. She's seen a lot of horror in Central Africa. She saw evil and she also just got tired of the lie of modernity. She's like, I just want to have kids and get married and have a nice life and live in the countryside. And that's what we're planning. It's like, I also get sick of my own arrogance. Like, I know what's best. I get to decide what to do. I don't need anyone telling me what to do. It's exhausting. Is it meme, me at 10, no one tell me what to do. Me now, someone tell me what to do. I was joking with my female colleague that 50 Shades of Grey was the best-selling book for women of all time for a reason. There's a deep longing there, isn't there? Even if it's a terrible book and not necessarily something I'd encourage, but there's a deep longing that we have. Like, you know what? There's got to be some good authority out there. I can't keep this teenage stance that all authority is bad. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of memes about crusading. I think this is the year we're going to see crusade memes um, actually get real. Like they're going from this silly online to the more like, there's armies of demons that need to be fought. And I've got to be a bit careful what I say here because I don't want to incite anything. But I think we will see a seriousness when we take this seriously for the first time. God wills it, as people are saying. And I think they will move from the sarcastic, ironic meme to people going, you know what? I'm actually called to make the world a better place in this way, to create a little bit more heaven on this hellish earth that we've made in modernity. I think that is going to happen in different ways around the world. I'd say this is a matter of survival. So I'd say take this shit seriously. This is a matter of life or death, your own life or death, as someone that has, who in the past came close to self-ending, whose cousin who I was raised with did, whose aunt did, whose dad tried. This is for those of us who have been on the edge of mental health. I haven't been for a while, thankfully. It's survival mode. And this is survival for the nation. If you're in the West, this is survival for the species. This is survival individually. Like this way in which I take this shit seriously. And memes aside, I think so should you if you want to live. Come with me if you want to live. We can still have a sense of humor. Okay. First thing is we've got to understand we all have personal trauma around religion, around faith. We may have seen some of the excesses of pre-modernity elsewhere, like Jihad John there and stuff. Me and my girlfriend have seen Congo and Afghanistan and stuff. We when you when you see some of the awfulness of pre-modernity, you kind of long for a bit of modernity and order. Maybe that you were convinced by the atheists, but they increasingly seem old-fashioned now, don't they? I mean, I love a bit of Hitchens as much as anyone, but the Dawkins of this world, they just seem a bit old-fashioned. And a lot of them are saying, "Oh, I'm culturally Christian." I'm like, dude, you can't be just culturally Christian. I think you have to see how far the rabbit hole goes before you do anything else. That is the beginning. It's like how big is this? Like how deep does this go in me, through me? This is the beginning of it. Zachary talks about this demodernizing and what's his word for it? Desecularizing. I don't know his way of looking at it, but this is mine. Yeah, so with the kids, this is Zachary again. Porcu, I can never say his name. He's Canadian. He won't mind. He's nice. Becoming recovering modern. So, what do we do to do that? Yeah. So, first thing is what we need to get past. We need to have humility. We need to get past our. I mean, modernity is the cult of arrogance. That would be another way of saying it. I know best. I'm the one who's worked it out. I trust no one. So I think getting past our own arrogance. I remember when I started studying Aikido, and I'd like question the sensei. And eventually I was like, you know what? He knows what he's doing. He's been doing this for years. What am I doing? Questioning the sensei. And that just wasn't tolerated either. You don't just tell the sensei he's wrong, you know. So having the humility to sort of try what the sensei is doing at the very least, I learned the hard way. I was battered into that. We've got to get beyond irony. Like I love a bit of a meme, bit of a joke, it's all good, but getting beyond being ironic about everything. This is the last defense of the modern ego. This is the sort of postmodern, cynical, ironic kind of way of looking at things. So beyond cynicism and irony is really key. That kind of hipster cool. Hipster's like the last youth subculture of modernity before it dies, right? Like we haven't really had anything since the hipster. Now we're splitting into all these micro subcultures. It's the last big one because it is modernity. It is the essence of modernity, is to sneer. Yeah. And you've got to get past the cringe. Like there's a way in which when we've been taught that anything religious, for example, is like Ned Flanders. If I anything pagan, I'm talking to the trees. That's all hippie bullshit. We've got to get past the cringe factor that says I'm so cool. I think it was Kant who said definition of modernity is if someone walked in and you were on your knees praying, you'd feel embarrassed, right? Like that's how they get you. They get you with the embarrassment. I'd say another one is the Clever Trap. So it's Alex O'Connor. It's one of the smartest guys I think on modern YouTube. I like him a lot. Does great work. Good channel. But he's so clever. And sometimes I think he's too clever. He can talk himself out of anything. He's always on the verge of being Christian, never quite manages it. It's kind of like Will Mulder and Scully kiss, on the X-Files. So I think it's part of the shtick of his channel, but sometimes I just think, dude, man, just be a bit more embodied, a bit more accepting, like living from the tie up and arguing with everything, being super clever. It's not how I see people actually find wisdom, no matter how cognitively clever you are. And he's a bright child. I don't just mean him. He's an exemplar of one of the defenses of modernity, I would say. So here's the quick answer. What do we do about it? You need to embrace these things again. So you need to find your way back to the body, the nostos of the body, the nostos of community, the nostos of spirituality, right in the middle of your life, decentering yourself. That one's key. And the nostos of the environment of place. So this is the tetrarchy model. I've got other videos on that. But that's the short answer. Okay, after a long video, there's that. Now I'm going to go into that a little bit for the next 20 minutes. Okay, so my way in was embodiment. I think it's a good place to start because the body's visceral. It's here. It's like I can go dancing. I can get down the gym. I can, do the embodied stuff. Obviously, be a bit careful of the performative body in the gym or the dance studio. It's not what it externally looks like as an object, but how it actually is to embody yourself, to be present to the body. Yoga's great for that. There's so many good body work. There's so many good practices. I wrote the book on that. All right, like there's a reason for me it started with the body and then so maybe it's a good place for a lot of people to start and then it kind of opened up, let's say, into yeah, many other things. And that beautiful opening started with this thing here, right, at the body. Like, okay, if this is not an object, if I'm not an it, okay, what else isn't? And the other one is nature. Touch grass is a saying for a reason in this internet age. The more people go outside, the less secular they become. Like this, there's a reason intellectuals sit around indoors, right? There's a reason that farmers are often religious. People that just walk their dog every day, right? People that spend a lot of time outside, they often find a depth of connection and spirituality. Like I've been in the Balkans, and one of the things I've been trying to do is get outside every day. I'm like, okay, if I was really thinking about living here. I think I'm not going to now, but I think I'm going to go home to UK. But I was like, what? I need to get my feet on the ground, right? Like that is the program I would have for migrants, is getting them outdoors a lot. If you are actually gonna get off the land, and certainly I think it just helps very quickly and naturally if you spend time outside. This starts happening. You move beyond the urban modern. The other thing I'd say is beauty is a doorway. So obviously nature, I mentioned, that could be churches, it could be the beauty of children, it could be, beautiful women. You got to be careful with some of these, but like real beauty, the sh real shine, like a girl who really shines inside out, beauty, goodness combined, rather than, the Botox and whatever. Um, I just noticed I'd go in churches and just have these profound experiences. I'd sit in beautiful churches and I go, wow, this is really impacting me. Before I had any kind of belief, it was just the aesthetic that led it. I think there's something in aesthetics, there's something in being around the beauty, and it's like every kind of beauty, music, food, children, like all. Think about like a really like an Italian. Italians love God, they love family, they love sex, they love art, they love food, of course. All the chakras of beauty and enjoyment, and you've got to be careful you don't get too hedonistic within that. But like embracing life on life's terms, embracing the beauty of the world. Real beauty is wholesome. It inspires. Like think of modern art as the opposite of that, right? Modern art doesn't inspire, it kind of questions and insults and provokes. It's like modern architecture is the same, right? Does it inspire, like, I don't know, St. Paul's Cathedral? Yeah, Florence. Does it nourish you? Does it make you stronger? I'll notice this in a relationship. I'll feel really stronger. Whereas, like, if it's not a wholesome relationship, I'll just get addicted. I just want more. Yeah. So, yeah, we've got to look for real pleasure, real. Could I say real pleasure here as well as real beauty? I think if you develop a relationship with actually deeply asking what beauty or what real wholesome pleasure is, like it's a difference between like your mum's Sunday dinner and like a dirty kebab from Abdul in the high street. Like you can feel the difference. You can tell the difference. So like this is where embodiment helps as a beginning actually, because it tunes you into that what is genuinely wholesome and nourishing. Right, is religion necessary? Well, people in addiction recovery say it is. They say you need at least spirituality, and you need structure and meaning around that spirituality. Structure, traditions. They talk about steps and traditions in AA. That starts to be like a religion if there's structure, if there's traditions around it. And every culture in human history that has lasted more than 100 years has had religion. So maybe let's look at the options. Option one, modernity, atheist modernity is right, and we've found the answer, and we're so clever. Or answer number two, we're one of those cultures that really doesn't operate. Even though modernity's been around more than 100 years, in its like more fully atheist form, it's really since World War II, isn't it? We're coming up to the 100 years now. I would just say like the humility to say maybe religion is good, and not just spiritual, but religious. Yeah, religious people are actually breeding as well. There's just data on this. Space Mormons is the future. Media's really done a job in making religious people seem evil and mocking religious people in almost every media format. From the Peaky Blinders to cartoons. Yeah, so we have a certain conditioning against it. And remember, modernity is the anti-religion religion. So it's going to really push back against this. And you do have to get past a certain like weirdness and embarrassment. I was raised Catholic, but when I started going back to church after a 30-year break, it was like cringe and weird and awkward. And, just find some nice people. Some places are more accepting than others. Talk to people. So like, I don't quite know what I'm doing. What do I do here? Um, you need some conception of God. Yeah. Like in AA, they talk about higher power. So what is that? Like, not everyone can just sign up for being Orthodox or Catholic or whatever. So what do you do to find a higher power? Like, you need to be open, you need to be willing. I've got a whole video on this, by the way. I've got another video on how to be religious you can look up. Um, won't go into more detail, but in AA, this you need some kind of higher power, and it doesn't have to be the sort of Skybeard daddy kind of thing. There is a reason for that image, but yeah, you've got to get past that. That could be any number of things. There's like 10 things it could be. Source is a popular one with some people I work with. I work with young men. Some of them like source. Love is very much in our Christian heritage, so that's there. Ideas of consciousness. You hear Peterson talk about the logos. I'd say the key thing here, though, is to be experiential. So you don't have to have a well worked out theory to be open. You need what's called the MVG, the minimum viable God, to get you experiencing, to get you open. Um, One of my mentors in AA said, your higher power can be anything as long as it's not you. So you're decentering yourself. Now, if you make another human, I'd say maybe not you or another human being, because that is going to end badly. Yeah. And there's lots of people working on this, Viveki, more centrist, had him on the podcast, Peterson, Peugeot, these are all people working in this area. So like if you do need intellectual help, it's out there, but I don't think intellectual is the key because some of these guys, particularly Viveki and Peterson, are super clever, but I don't necessarily think that is the way in. Um, you could look up psychomath, previously homath, levels of development. I think seeing that we're moving on to a higher level of development and a way into the philosophy of traditionalism or faith or the re-enchantment of the world, but without regressing. Now, I've got to be a bit careful here because the progress regress is a very Christian idea, this kind of modern Christian heritage that may not be helpful to take on this sort of pseudo-Christian modernist idea. However, there does seem to be an evidence base that people go through stages of development, they see things of increasing complexity, and maybe modernism is the sort of they call it orange meme in systems like spiral dynamics or level five, you'll sometimes hear. What it means is that it's a stage people go through, and sometimes they have to go through that late modern, postmodern green stage. But what happens at the kind of integral stage is you reintegrate the traditionalist kind of blue structure with rules and boundaries. You see this in AA, you see this in people who are coming to religion, but in a more sophisticated way. And a lot of systems like Catholicism, for example, they have different stages for different people. There'll be different priests working at different levels. So yeah, if you bump into one level of development, that doesn't mean that the whole thing is impossible, that there is another level out there. So this is like, the 40K space Catholics, is it a way back or a way forwards? I'd say, again, this framework comes from the spin job of modernity that says religion is backwards, spirituality is backwards. I think we do have to unearth that, though another way of looking at it is this levels of development where we are going forward, but in a way that's spiralic, that integrates some previous things. So it's kind of like progressive actually, if you think of progressive in the American sense, that is now not the lead edge, it's now regressive. So the lead edge looks regressive because people can only look down, but it's actually post progressive. God, I'm tired and hungry. I hope I got that right. I think I did. Okay. So post progressive is not backwards. And where people get upset is if they're really stuck at a level of development, it will look like you're going back. And there is a regressive move. This is the return to sort of, you'll see this in the Islamic world, like the return to fundamentalism. You see it amongst Jews, you'll see it amongst some American Christians. And it's very different. Like Peugeot's orthodoxy is very different than like a fundamentalist Christian who believes in the literal word of the Bible. This is just a sort of denial of modernity rather than, the only way out is through kind of thing, the Churchill statement. Yeah, so post-progressive rather than regressive, or else we're just stuck in the Rick and Morty cynicism, which is no good for anyone. I guess another thing I'd say is like if you want this, if you want to be less secular, if you want to get through modernity, like just already what cuts you off from your higher power. Like you fucking know. Like people know. Like make a list. Like pause the video, make a list right now. Like pause the video, do that. Take you a minute. All right, what are the things? It's pretty obvious. What are your sins? There's different meanings of the word sin. You'll hear to miss the mark sometimes, but the one I like is to render apart from. It's from a German sunder, old German sunder. And yeah, what rips you apart from the divine? I think it's pretty bloody obvious in most cases. Yeah. Um, Good. The other thing I'd say is if you want to start having spiritual experiences, it's totally normal to have spiritual experiences. People have been doing it. It accidentally happens to ravers, it accidentally happens in the gym. Obviously, people like Sufis or whatever deliberately do it. Fasting is one thing I've sometimes used. Meditation, obviously, there's lots of ways one can have spiritual experiences. You need a container for that to make sense of it, which is religion. But I think what happened a lot is the Western church lost the spiritual experience element and just became the container, which, modernity then went and said, well, the container's empty, you know? And there's costs and benefits to different ways to do that. Like psychedelics, for example, may be very bad idea if you have mental health issues or family history of that. There's different costs and benefits to different things. Mysticism, this is definitely a way in. Spiritual experience, super common. Like American footballers, there's this one study that 50% of American footballers had a spiritual experience while playing American football. And these aren't necessarily known as the most, hippie group. So I'd say this can be a way in. See, like Jung said, I don't believe in God. I know, I experience. Yeah. Yeah. And you might get that just walking in nature. But you need structure and community and tradition to make sense of the spiritual experience. This is why I say you shouldn't say, oh, I'm spiritual but not religious. That's just a type of narcissism. You need the structure, community, and accountability. That's just muppetry to say you're spiritual but not religious. It's arrogance. It lacks structure, lacks community, lacks tradition, and it risks narcissism. Maybe it's a starting point. If you're like, I've been too hurt by religion, it's my starting point. Maybe. But yeah, to get to the spiritual materialism and the narcissism around that is JP Spears taking the piss out of yoga people. Mentioned that earlier, so that's the risk. And there's other ways in, right? Like service and devotion for some people, that becomes their faith. Like some of my Indian friends, they can be very devotional with Ganesh and this kind of thing. It's very beautiful to see. Giving money to the poor has been a long Christian tradition. Service and devotion, whether it's working with drug addicts or homeless, that can be very, very beautiful spiritual practice. And it's very, very non-modern because it says you're not the most important person in the world. You're going to be devotional. You're going to bow down, like literally prostrate oneself sometimes. You're going to wash the feet of the poor, whatever it is, right? There's something in that which goes against the narcissism of modernity. So there's different ways in. You can look up Roger Welch's book, No Relation again. They're a very nice man. There's different types of spiritual practice. Ken Wilber, if you want more in-depth details. And, there's traditional yogas. There's lots of paths in the kind of Indian traditions. They also exist in, you'll find them in mystic Christianity as well, like different yogas. You don't have to do the thing that the stretchy girls do. You can find a way in out of secular modernist hell, whatever that is for you. I'd say participating in rituals a big one. Like this is do then believe model. Like just go to church, just fucking do mass, go to church. It was interesting, some studies where they got undergraduates at university to make up a religion. They'd be like worshipping Tuesday or worshipping a dog or whatever. And what was weird is once they did the rituals, a lot of them actually started believing in the religion. Like, and the professors had to like stop the studies because they're like, oh God, we're accidentally making people religious. Now you can do that deliberately, right? Like it's like let the body lead, let the community lead, let the ritual lead. Josh Schrei, one of my teachers, said you can do things with ritual you can't do with psychology, and that is absolutely right. You can like been talking to some of my Ukrainian friends about like healing rituals for soldiers coming back from the war. Like you can do things with ritual you cannot do with psychology. I think that is profound. Yeah, and another this is the what's his face, the just do it model. Like just do it. Just do it. Like do the faith thing. Just do it. Just fake it till you make it. Just do it. Like it's on one level it's a choice. It's saying, you know what, I refuse to be a secular modern. And I'd say, don't shop around the spiritual supermarket forever. Like this is one thing I see like the Muslims do well is lots I worry about in their religion and don't like in their religion. But one thing I respect them for is that they commit. They pray 5 times a day, they fast for a month, they go to Mecca. It is hardcore. They really commit and respect to that. I think you've got to commit and not just be lightweight about whatever you're doing. The spiritual supermarket, as Charles Taylor says, it's not the place to be forever. That's the way out of modernity. Is because otherwise it's just more modernity, right? It's just more consumerism. Community is definitely a way in. Like be around non-modern people, be around people who are not living in a secular way. Just normalize it. Hang out with them. I guarantee it. If I would get more Catholic if I lived in the Philippines, I guarantee it. Like living in Croatia and Slovenia for a year has like made me and my girlfriend like way more Catholic. We're like, whoa, okay. We're like, just it's just normalized here. Yeah. So immerse yourself in that. You are the people you hang out with. So like move away. I'm not saying like don't talk to your decadent brother ever, but you might want to hang out with some less decadent people most of the time. Yeah. Look for virtue. So, then some of the nuns I was working with in Ukraine really impressed me. And I saw their shininess, and I was like, wow, there's something in that. I'm going to follow the winners here. They were just better regulated than a lot of the people, when the bombs were dropping, they were just the ones smiling. And I was like, okay, there's something going on here. And Jonathan Peugeot's one whose embodiment I like. He has a certain something in his demeanor, right, which Peterson lacks. Get well soon, Mr. Peterson, if you're out there. And then there's a colleague of mine, just normal people. It doesn't have to be like nuns or famous people. I'm not going to embarrass her anymore because I already put her in another video, but colleagues that can inspire you, friends that can inspire you with their faith and their devotion. Yeah, and I'd say you're probably better off if you're raised in a tradition following it, going back to it. That's a nostos. It can be painful and hard unless there's too much trauma. Then you might need to look elsewhere, right? And I would say beware the exoticism. I've got friends that have gone orthodox for the vibes. Like they wear black and they've got big beards and there's incense. It's like, okay, well, we're not in it for the vibes. You might want to go to your own tradition if it still exists, if it's got some semblance, like it's usually best. Now, if it's too painful, what you've got to understand is that all institutions are imperfect because they're human and not heaven, and they're always corrupt. All institutions are corrupt, and it was a big barrier for me with Catholicism, was like the abuse scandals and going, God. And then I met some people like these nuns who were just good people and who were really keen to make sure their corner of the church wasn't abusive. And I was like, well, okay, I believe them. And there's good people everywhere, and the worst people that hide in the best places. That's true of scouts, it's true of martial arts. It's not just religion. Like loads of abuse in public schools, scouting organizations, jiu-jitsu clubs, like some of the worst. Because bad people hide in good places. So that's one thing that really helped me. And some of the point in committing to a faith, and again, the Muslims are good at this. I think some Christians are a bit lightweight, to the Anglicans, is you won't like it. That's the point, that you're not the boss of you anymore, that there's some parts of it that you find difficult to accept. It's part of what faith is, part of what religion is. And some organizations are too far gone. I certainly think, the Anglican Church has some good parts, just had a split because this, but it's got, I walked into the beautiful 800-year-old church where I used to live in England a couple of years back, and there's a trans vicar, and I thought, I feel so sorry for all the old people there. I think it's, yeah, some places are too far gone, but there's shining lights everywhere. You get the odd vicar, the odd person who's still good. So you can still go to a tradition, join in a tradition if they're not like super esoteric or super, trad or whatever. Like, yeah, I'd say, one of the things I've been doing is I've started using word like moral language and sacred language again, like non-ironically. I think that's a beautiful thing to do. Um, yeah, it actually starts to, just jokingly calling everyone heretics like in Warhammer. But no, it's starting to more seriously say some of these things. Um, and it makes people uncomfortable, but you're also like bringing that in. You're saying like, no, 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 this is the world I inhabit in my language, in my actions, in my community, but language is part of it. Yes. So where did I get to? Just make sure I haven't missed any. Getting a bit tired now. Yeah. So the other thing I'd say is it's not just pick a mix. We're not all the same, right? It's not just like, oh, like some religions end up in worse places. Some religions have different attitudes towards women, children, etc. Okay, C.S. Lewis said Christ is either lying, a madman, or who he says he was. They're the only options. It's one of the three. Is he mad? He's not a spiritual teacher. He's either mad, deluded, he's a lying psychopath, or who he said he was. And I'm like, okay, wow, that's confronting. Right. So this idea of all religions are the same, this is hippie bullshit. I'd say key thing is you're engaging in like embodied relational practice, not just theory, not just on YouTube watching videos like mine, but getting into churches, participating in ritual, praying, I'm not going to give a big thing on this because it's not my expertise, but like make sure it's embodied. These are the 5 one-word prayers that I've started some students off with if they're interested. These are like basic things people do, right? Like I've got longer videos on this, but this is some like one-word prayers is everyone says thank you, God, when something really good happens. Everyone says, please, I don't want cancer when they're waiting for the test. These are, I've seen it in the trenches. These are words that people say. They say, God, are you there? Hello. Or, yes, okay, I accept this bad thing that I think's bad. I accept it. And then, actually admitting you're not perfect. That's part of the anti-modernist humility is to say, I fucked up, I sinned, I've done bad. And, that has become easier for me with time. It's not usually the easiest starting point. Serenity prayer, it's a nice one. You can even take God out at the beginning because it's implicit. You're talking to a higher power. Yeah, good one for beginners. There's a key piece from the Lord's Prayer. Again, decentering yourself. Other people are much more expert than me on this stuff. But I think there's a group of people that are not yet ready for a tradition that can start off with stuff like this. Obviously, it's classics from different traditions. I've got other videos out there. I did one from my old channel, How Carl Can Find God. It's not really about Carl. Like, big shout out to Lotus Eaters, solid British guys. Another video on discipline that may be helpful, videos on addiction that may be helpful. So do have a look at some of the other videos on the channel. A lot of them are 10 minutes long, not as long as this. And I'd say, like, just to close here, like, if you're in secular modernity and you suspect it is hell or could be hell, what have you got to lose? Like, what have you got to lose by looking elsewhere? Like, what else are you going to do? Work, buy, consume, die. That's it. That's it. That's all we got. Bullshit. Bullshit. Okay, so that's my presentation. That's like nearly 2 hours. Like, comment, subscribe, pray, love God, try and be good to each other. I'm going to have dinner. See you later.